What happens when a broken guy grabs a soul sword and decides the world can eat shit? You get this orange-haired beast. Getsuga Tenshō carving ass, Sero Oscuras erasing the nobodies, Mugetsu blacking out Japan. Izuku Midoriya pulled Zangetsu out of his soul and made every villain look like bitches. Absolute monster. Welcome, legends, to Chronos Recom. I wrote this story myself, so if you have any suggestions or what-ifs you want to see, drop it in the comments below. Also, just wanted to let you know I've got a Patreon set up now for anyone who wants to support the channel directly. You can get early access to stories, submit direct fan requests, and get exclusive content. It's totally optional, but if you want to help keep these stories coming, check it out. Links in the description. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and hit that bell so you never miss an upload. Let's dive into this story.
The first thing the driver noticed was that the rain had stopped falling on his windshield. Not everywhere. Just there, in a circle, maybe 30 feet across, like something above the highway had decided the weather was an inconvenience and pushed it aside. The wipers squeaked across dry glass, the radio cut to static, and the man in the passenger seat, a low-level enforcer with a quirk that let him harden his forearms into slabs of iron, felt his teeth start to buzz in his gums. "Stop the truck," he said. "We're 40 minutes from the drop." Stop the truck. 3 semis in a convoy running the coast road out of Musutafu at 2 in the morning, hauling a shipping container with air holes drilled in the side. 41 people inside that container, kids among them. The kind of cargo that made men rich in a city where the heroes only patrolled where the cameras were. The lead truck's brakes screamed. The convoy folded up like an accordion and a shadow came down out of the sky. It landed on the asphalt between the second and third trailer, and the road cracked in a starburst pattern under its boots. Steam rolled off the pavement where rain had been standing a second before. 12 men piled out of the cabs with pistols and quirks and the confidence of people who had never once been on the losing side of a math problem. What they saw was a teenager. He was big, too big for whatever age he was, shoulders like a door frame, arms thick with the kind of muscle you earn instead of inherit. Black hoodie, sleeves pushed up, hair a burnt, aggressive orange, plastered flat by the rain that had stopped touching him. And across his back, wrapped in dirty white cloth and strapped with nothing more complicated than a belt, a slab of steel the size of a coffin lid. He rolled his shoulder. The cloth-wrapped thing came off his back and into his hand like it weighed as much as an umbrella. "There are people in that box," he said. One of the 12 started to answer. He got as far as opening his mouth. The teenager pointed the wrapped end of the cleaver down the length of the convoy, and something blue ran along the cloth like current through a wire, and he said 2 words in a voice that had gravel and church bells in it. "Getsuga Tenshō." The crescent left the blade at a width of 60 feet. It took the front half of the lead truck, the guardrail, 400 feet of coastal cliff face, and a section of the Pacific Ocean that would be measured later in the low thousands of tons. The blast wave picked up the second trailer and set it down again 80 feet to the left. The sound arrived at a fishing village 6 kilometers up the coast, and 11 people there filed police reports about an earthquake that never registered on a single instrument. When the light died, there was a canyon in the highway where the road used to bend. The 12 men were still standing. He had aimed above them, past them through the empty lane, and every single one of them understood in the same instant that this had been a choice, and that the choice could be revised. Their boss went to 200 feet tall. That was his quirk. Mass multiplication, a real one. An A-rank underground bruiser who had broken the spine of a mid-list pro hero in Osaka and walked away laughing. He came up out of his own coat like a mountain deciding to attend a meeting, and he brought a fist down that would have flattened a parking garage. The teenager did not raise the sword. He raised his head, and the air changed. You have to understand something about spiritual pressure, because the world was about to spend a decade learning it the hard way. It has nothing to do with wind. It does not push. It weighs. It settles on the shoulders of everything alive inside its radius and reminds it, at a level older than language, that it is small. The giant's fist stopped 40 feet from the ground. His knee buckled. 200 feet of villain went down onto the highway hard enough to shear the road into plates, and he lay there in the crater of himself, unable to make his lungs do the thing lungs do, while a boy the size of a linebacker walked up his forearm and stood on his wrist and looked down at him with an expression of profound irritation. "You're heavy," the boy said. "That's it. That's the whole trick." He hit him once with the flat of the cloth-wrapped blade across the temple. The giant shrank as he lost consciousness, and the boy rode him down. 9 minutes later, the police found the container cut open along a seam that no torch on earth could have made. 41 people wrapped in the driver's emergency blankets, 12 criminals zip-tied to a guardrail with their own belts, and a highway with a canyon in it. A girl of about 9, still holding a blanket around her shoulders, asked the officer who found her what the orange-haired man's name was. The officer said he had no idea. He'd been asking the same question for 2 years. To understand the man on that highway, you have to go back 11 years to a different reign. Izuku Midoriya was 4 years old and he was arguing about a lizard. That was the thing his mother remembered afterward, when the reporters and the analysts and the government men came asking. Everyone wanted to know about the villain. Nobody asked what they'd been talking about, and it seemed to Inko Midoriya like the single most important detail in the world. Her son had found a lizard on the wet path through Tatsumi Park and wanted to bring it home, and she had said no, and he had launched into the kind of legal argument only a 4-year-old can construct, which was that the lizard had looked at him and that this constituted consent. She was laughing. That's what she remembered. She was laughing and holding an umbrella too small for both of them, and the rain was coming down in sheets. And then the streetlight ahead of them went out. Then the next one. Then the third. The thing that came out of the wet dark on the path was not shaped like a person. And the word villain is what the papers used because there was no other word available in the year 2010. It stood 12 feet. Its face was long and lipless. Its body was fur and bone in the wrong proportions, and from the crown of its skull hung a single pale lure, swaying, glowing faintly, the way an anglerfish carries a lamp. Underground, in the places where the missing get counted by people who don't file reports, they called it the Grand Fisher. It fed on souls. It had eaten 46 of them in 11 years, and it had never once been photographed. Inko did the thing every mother does. She put her body between it and her child, and she screamed for a hero. And she kept screaming while the rain swallowed the sound, and every window in every apartment above that path stayed shut. No hero came. The lure swung. The claw came down. And Izuku Midoriya, 4 years old, watched a hand the size of a car door go through his mother's stomach and out the other side, and watched her lifted off the ground with her feet still moving, and watched her thrown into the wet pavement like a bag of laundry. The umbrella rolled away into a storm drain. Here's where a different story would have him run. He crawled to her instead. He got his small hands into her cardigan, and he pulled, and she was too heavy, and there was too much of her coming out onto the concrete. And it was warm, and the rain was cold, and the two temperatures mixing on his palms is a thing he would feel in his sleep for the next 20 years. Mom. His voice went high and broke apart. Mom, get up. Get up. Grief is a chemical event. It goes into the body, and the body decides what to make of it. Most bodies make tears. His made something else. Time came apart like wet paper. He was standing on the side of a skyscraper, not on the roof, on the side on glass turned horizontal, with a gray sky where the ground should be, and a whole city tilted 90 degrees around him, and a wind that came from nowhere and smelled like ozone and rain. 2 figures stood on the building across from him. The first was tall and wrapped in a black cloak that moved when the air did not. Sunglasses, stubble, hair like wind-blown ash. He said nothing. He watched, and his watching had the quality of a man reading the last page of a book he'd written a long time ago. The second figure was Izuku, except white. Bone-white skin, bone-white hair, teeth too many and too wide, and eyes that were black where they should have been white and gold where they should have been anything else. It crouched on the glass with its wrists hanging loose, and it grinned at him, and its voice came out layered, 2 voices in one throat. "Oh, look at this. Look at this, 4 years old and already crying on the floor. That's our body? That's our body. Pathetic. Move over, kid. Let me drive." Izuku, who was 4, who had been arguing about a lizard 9 seconds ago, who was standing on a wall in a city that had turned sideways, looked up at the thing wearing his face and felt something crack open behind his ribs. Rage. Clean, total, structural rage. "Get away from her," he said. "She's already dead. Get away from her." The white thing stopped grinning, and the man in the black cloak spoke, finally, and his voice was low and worn smooth like river stone. "If you want to save her, boy, you'll have to take my hand and never let go of it. Not once. Not ever. Do you understand what you're picking up?" Izuku did not understand. He was 4. He picked it up anyway. On a wet path in Tatsumi Park, a child's eyes opened and they were burning ethereal blue. The Grand Fisher's lure swung down toward Izuku Midoriya's chest because the meat was incidental and the soul was the meal, and the wound in her stomach was already pouring more than a body has to give. It stopped because something on the ground was pushing back. The rain in a 10-meter circle stopped reaching the ground. It hung in the air, each drop shivering in place, and then it went upward. The child stood. His voice, when it came, had no business belonging to a 4-year-old, and he did not say it to the villain. He said it to the white thing in the sideways city, and to the man in the black cloak, and to the universe, which had elected to be absent tonight. "I'm not fighting because I want to win. I'm fighting because I have to win." He reached into the empty air in front of him. His fingers closed on a hilt that had always been there, and he pulled. The sword came out of nothing, out of his own soul, out of the space between one heartbeat and the next. A colossal cleaver, longer than he was tall, edge on one side, and raw, unfinished steel on the other, with a hilt wrapped in cloth that trailed away into the rain. It should have crushed him. It weighed on him like an idea instead. The Grand Fisher had eaten 46 souls, and it had never seen this. Its long face pulled back into something almost like recognition, and it made a sound that no one who heard it that night has ever successfully described. Izuku Midoriya moved. No one saw it. There was no one to see it. The path was empty, and the windows were shut, and the pavement where the child had been standing simply split, 4 gouges torn out of the concrete by the push-off of a body going faster than the eye assembles images. The cleaver came through the Grand Fisher's midsection at a rising angle, right to left, through fur and bone and whatever it kept where organs should be. The 2 halves came apart with the smooth reluctance of a log being split. Spiritual energy poured off the edge and closed the wound as it made it, cauterizing, sealing, denying the thing, the one gift it had always relied on. No regeneration. No reforming. No crawling away into the dark to heal and hunt again next year. It made one attempt. The stump of it reached for the lure to feed and stitch itself back together. The cleaver came down a second time and put an end to the argument. Ash went up into the rain, and the rain came back down, and the streetlights, one by one, flickered on again. Izuku dropped the sword. It hit the path and rang like a church bell, and then it was simply gone, back into the place it had come from. And he was a 4-year-old boy again, standing barefoot in a puddle of his mother's blood. He knelt. He put both hands on the hole in her stomach and pressed down, because that is what he had seen on television, and he screamed for help until the neighbors finally opened their windows. Izuku Midoriya survived. 14 hours of surgery. You'll forgive me the word. It's the only one the doctors used. And 6 pints of somebody else's blood. And a scar she would keep for the rest of her life. And she survived. And when she woke up, her son was asleep in the chair beside her bed with dried blood still under his fingernails because he had refused to let anyone wash his hands until she opened her eyes. The Quirk registration office needed a name for the file. They watched the security footage from the convenience store at the end of the path. 60 frames of nothing, and then 1 frame of a blue crescent, and then nothing again. And they interviewed a child who could not explain a single thing that had happened. And eventually, a mid-level bureaucrat wrote 2 words on a form because the form required 2 words. Emitter type. Soul resonanced. It is on his hero license to this day. It has never once come close. He grew. That is the polite way to describe it. What actually happened is that Izuku Midoriya's body spent 11 years being renovated from the inside by three things that had no business sharing an address. The hair came first, green fading to a burnt orange over the course of one summer when he was 11, which his mother cried about and then laughed about, and then bought a different shampoo for. Then the height, then the shoulders. By 14, he was 6 feet and change, and built like something you'd hire to move a piano, and the other kids at Aldera Junior High had stopped talking to him, and it took him a long time to work out that the reason was not dislike. It was that being near him made their heads hurt. He learned to suppress it. Hours in his room, every night, folding his own presence down smaller and smaller, like a man packing a parachute, until he could sit in a classroom without the windows humming. He got good at it. He got so good at it that the only tell was that stray dogs would follow him home, and that dying old women in hospital corridors would sit up and look at him and smile, and that sometimes in the wrong part of the city, things that were already dead would notice him and come running. Those he cut down. Nobody ever thanked him, because nobody else could see them. The sideways city he could reach whenever he closed his eyes and meant it. The man in the black cloak taught him. Never gently. Getsuga Tenshō he learned at 9 on a rooftop in his own soul, and he collapsed a real water tower in the real world the first time he tried it awake. Shunpo he learned at 10 and broke his own ankle twice, and then stopped breaking it. The name of the sword the man gave him without ceremony, the way you hand someone their own coat. Zangetsu, Izuku repeated. Say it like you mean it, and it will do what you mean. The white thing fought him for the body every 4 months like a tenant who had never accepted the lease. When Izuku was 12, he lost. 26 minutes of his life he cannot account for. A warehouse in the industrial district that no longer exists, and a bone-white mask he woke up holding half of. When he was 13, he stopped losing. He took the mask off the thing's face and he kept it, and after that, when he pulled it on, it was a weapon and not a surrender. The white thing was still in there. It screamed, it complained, it offered advice, occasionally good, and underneath all of it there was a third thing, older and colder, blue lines that surfaced in his skin when something tried to hurt him, and a bow he could make out of the air when he was in a mood for it, and a heritage no one had explained to him yet. Because the man in the black cloak was, on that one subject, a coward. At 14, he put on a black hoodie and went out into the city and started hitting people who deserved it. 2 years of that. 2 years of gang crews and traffickers, and the sort of villain that operates in districts where the hero agencies file the paperwork as low commercial value. 2 years of a rumor the underground gave a dozen names. The Cleaver, the Reaper of Musutafu, the Orange One. 2 years of the Hero Public Safety Commission opening a file with 60 pages and no photographs in it, and then a highway got a canyon in it, and the file went to the top of somebody's desk. The letter came on a Thursday, hand-delivered, which letters do not do. Mr. Midoriya, you have been operating without a license for 26 months. The commission would like to prosecute you. I would like to enroll you. Attend the entrance examination on the 7th, and we can find out which of us is more persuasive. Principal Nezu, UA, High School. His mother read it 4 times. Then she went into the kitchen and put her hands on the counter and stood there with her shoulders shaking. And he stood in the doorway not knowing what to do, the way he never knew what to do, because the sword had come with a manual, and this had not. Mom, 11 years. She wiped her face with her wrist. 11 years I've watched you go out that door and come back with somebody else's blood on you and tell me it's fine. 11 years. And now they want to give you a classroom? She laughed, and it came out wrecked. Izuku, sweetheart, go be a hero where somebody can see you do it. He carried the sword to the exam because he did not own a bag it fit in. UA's practical examination is a simulated urban district and 3,000 faux villain robots worth 20, 30, and 70 million yen apiece. And every year the school builds them again, and every year they get destroyed, and every year the destruction is measured in the low dozens. 1,600 applicants stood at the gate of Battle Center B, One of them was standing off to the side with a cloth-wrapped slab of metal on his shoulder, looking at the wall like he was waiting for a bus. Hey, you. A boy with glasses and a jaw you could measure angles with had appeared in front of him, arms rigid at his sides. That object. Weapons of that class require commission pre-approval for use in a licensed examination environment. It's not a weapon. It is manifestly a weapon. It's a part of me. Izuku rolled the shoulder. You want to see the paperwork on your arm? Nearby, a round-faced girl with brown hair laughed out loud, caught herself, and clamped both hands over her mouth. Izuku's eyes went to her for exactly 1 second. She waved. He looked away like the waving had been an attack. The gate opened without a countdown. "What are you waiting for?" came a voice over the loudspeaker. A man who sounded like he'd been woken up against his will. There are no countdowns in a real fight. Go. 1,600 applicants surged. One of them was already gone. The crack came a half second after he vanished. That flat, vicious whip snap of air being asked to get out of the way faster than it can. Half the field flinched. The girl with the brown hair spun around looking for the source and found only a dent in the pavement where a person had been. 4 blocks in, a 3-pointer swung a fist at nothing and lost its arm at the shoulder. 6 blocks in, 3 of them turned toward the sound and were not there anymore. Izuku came around a corner onto a boulevard and found what he'd been walking toward. A wide avenue with a river of robots pouring up it. 30 at least. Treads chewing the asphalt, guns tracking. Behind him, he could hear the other applicants arriving in 1s and 2s, scattering into doorways. He turned Zangetsu over in his hand and pointed the cloth-wrapped tip down the middle of the street. Blue climbed the wrappings. Getsuga Tenshō. Here is what the applicants behind him saw, and what 4 of them described to journalists later that week in nearly identical language. The color left the world. A crescent went down that boulevard at a width that spanned both sidewalks, and it did not hit the robots one at a time. It hit the street as a concept, and the street stopped being one. 30 machines came apart simultaneously in a single continuous roar. The blast plowed through the intersection at the far end, took the facades off 4 buildings, and kept going until it ran out of things to disagree with, 200 meters later. Then it was silent. And there was a trench down the middle of Battle Center B, and every window in a 2-block radius was raining down in pieces. Izuku put the sword back on his shoulder and walked into the smoke. Behind him, a boy with a tail said, out loud, to nobody, "What is he?" In the observation booth, 13 professional heroes were watching 32 screens, and 32 screens had all become 1 screen. "Point total," said Nezu pleasantly. The technician swallowed. "He's at 480 in 90 seconds. Midnight had a hand over her mouth. Present Mike had gone completely historically silent. Snipe leaned into the monitor with the expression of a man watching artillery being used on a mosquito. Shota Aizawa had his arms folded and his eyes narrowed, and he was not watching the robots. He was watching the boy's feet. "He's holding back," Aizawa said. "Oh, considerably," said Nezu. And in the corner of the booth, standing in a suit that fit him like a tent, a very large blonde man with sunken eyes and a smile that was doing something complicated, watched the trench in the boulevard and said nothing at all. The 0-pointer came up through the middle of the district like a building deciding to stand. 200 feet of it. Treads the size of houses. It had been designed as an unwinnable obstacle. A thing to make 16-year-olds understand the shape of the word retreat, and it had never once failed at that job. It came down the avenue, and the applicants ran, and one of them didn't. Ochako Uraraka had used her quirk 11 times in 4 minutes, which was 9 more than she should have, and the nausea had put her on her hands and knees in the middle of the street with a chunk of concrete on her ankle and a shadow moving across her that was 200 feet tall. She looked up. She would tell this story for the rest of her life, at dinner tables and on talk shows, and once, memorably, at a wedding, and she always told it the same way. She looked up, and she saw the robot, and she saw a boy standing on a lamppost above her looking at the robot the way you look at a delivery truck that's blocking your driveway. He sighed. She heard him sigh over the sound of a 200-foot machine walking. Then he said one word. Bankai. Understand. Nobody in that district was ever the same afterward. Not the applicants. Not the heroes in the booth. Not the girl on the ground. The word did not sound loud. It sounded final. For 1 full second, the light went out of the world. Not shadow. Absence. A black column that went up out of the lamppost and through the cloud layer, and inside it something roared that was too big to be a voice. The pressure hit like the ocean. 90 applicants across 4 blocks went to their knees at the same moment. A boy with engines in his calves put both hands on the pavement and found he could not get up. In the booth, 3 professional heroes grabbed the railing and Present Mike said in a small voice, "Kid." The column collapsed inward, and when it cleared, Izuku Midoriya was standing on the lamppost in a tattered black coat that snapped in a wind that was not there, and the coffin lid cleaver was gone. In his right hand was a slim jet-black blade with a chain hanging off the guard, and his eyes had gone from green to something with light behind them. He was above the zero-pointer's head. Nobody saw him move. 16 cameras were pointed at him, and no single frame contains the transit. He raised the black blade over his head, and there was one silent instant where the whole district saw a boy the size of a fingernail hanging in the sky over a machine the size of a stadium. He swung once. The Getsuga that came off the edge was black with a red core, and it made almost no sound at all, which is the part that frightened the professionals. It went through the zero-pointer from the crown of its skull to the treads, straight down the center line, and the 2 halves of the machine slid apart the way a stick of butter comes off a hot knife. It went through the pavement beneath it. It went through the drainage system beneath that. And when they surveyed the damage later, the cut was 70 feet deep and 1 atom wide. And the engineering department had to be talked out of preserving it as an exhibit. 200 feet of robot fell in opposite directions. Ochako Uraraka was directly under the left half. She had time to think. Distinctly, oh. The wind hit her first, and then an arm went around her back, and then the world moved sideways so fast that she stopped having opinions about it, and when it stopped, she was standing on the roof of a building 6 blocks away with a hand holding her steady by the shoulder blade. Behind them, 40,000 tons of machine hit the ground, and the whole district jumped. She looked up at him. Up close, he was enormous, and the coat was in ribbons, and he was scowling like the entire experience had cost him something. "You're safe now," he said. It came out as barely more than a grunt. Then he took his hand off her back with a care that did not match one other thing about him, and set her down on her feet like she was made of something breakable, and looked away. Ochako Uraraka, who had come to UA to make money to buy her parents a house, discovered in that moment that her heart was capable of a volume she had not previously been informed of. Hi, she said. "Hi, I'm Ochako Uraraka. Ochako Uraraka. Izuku, you have a really big sword." He looked at her. She put both hands over her face. The recall siren went off. The booth was silent for 3 full seconds. "So," said Nezu, folding his tiny hands, "rescue points." "He has." The technician checked twice. 62. 62. He kept moving people between kills. Nobody noticed because they were looking at the explosions. The technician turned around slowly. "Sir, combined total is 549. The record is 111. Nezu smiled all the way around his face. "Put him in 1A, he said. "Put him in 1A and don't tell him the record. Boys with that number in their head become insufferable." There was one more thing that happened before school started, and it happened at 8 in the evening on a beach full of garbage, and only 2 people know about it. Izuku had gone out there to train because the beach was the one place in Musutafu he could release Reiatsu without a property claim. He was 3 swings in when a very large blonde man walked out of the trash line in a suit and coughed blood into a handkerchief and then straightened up and became the most famous man alive. "I am here," said All Might. "Behind. Well, behind nothing, I suppose. You saw me coming from 400 meters. 600, Izuku said. "You breathe wrong." All Might laughed, and the laugh turned into a cough, and the cough turned into steam, and the number 1 hero in the world deflated into a gaunt man in an oversized suit with a scar on his side. You could set a bowl in. Izuku did not react. That, All Might said later, was the first thing that got him. "You knew," said the thin man. "I could feel it. You've got a hole in you." Izuku shrugged one shoulder. "Your soul's got the same hole. Somebody took a piece out of you a long time ago, and you've been running on what's left. The thin man sat down on a refrigerator. Then he told him. All of it. The torch, the chain, the 7 before him, the quirk that could be passed like a flame from candle to candle, and the fact that he was dying and had been looking for 4 years for a successor with the right shape of heart. And he said, in a voice that had won 100 million people over without once trying, "Young Midoriya, I would like to give you my power." The waves came in and went out. "No," Izuku said. All Might blinked. My boy, perhaps you don't understand what I'm offering." "I understand it fine." Izuku turned Zangetsu over and put it point down in the sand and leaned on the hilt and looked out at the black water. "You're offering me a second sword. I've already got one, and I've never once been able to put it down. You think I want 2? He was silent for a moment. "You've spent 40 years being everyone's ceiling. That's what you're really handing off. Not the quirk, the job. Somebody standing at the top so the rest of them have something to look up at." "Yes," All Might said quietly. "Forgive him, he was in a state. That is precisely it. Then give it to someone who needs it to get there." Izuku pulled the sword out of the sand and put it on his shoulder. "There's a kid out there who wants it so bad it's eating him. That's your guy. Find him, because when I get to the top, All Might, nobody's going to be looking up at me and feeling inspired." He started up the beach. "They're going to look up and feel safe. That's a different job. I'll do that one." He stopped halfway to the road. "Hey, number 1. "Yes?" 11 years ago, there was a thing eating people in Tatsumi Park." He did not turn around. "It put my mother in a hospital for 6 weeks. Nobody came." The thin man on the refrigerator did not answer, because there was no answer, and both of them knew it. "I'm not blaming you," Izuku said. "I'm telling you why I don't need your fire." And he walked up the beach and left the greatest hero in the world sitting on a broken refrigerator, thinking about a park he had never been to on a night when he had been in Los Angeles. Class 1A worked out its own hierarchy in 90 minutes, the way every class does. Then Izuku Midoriya walked in through the door sideways, because the sword didn't fit through it straight, and the hierarchy quietly reorganized itself around him without a single word being spoken. He took the seat by the window in the back. He put his feet flat and his hands in his lap, and he sat there like a piece of furniture that could kill you. 20 other teenagers spent the next hour finding reasons to look at the back of the room. Katsuki Bakugo took it personally, because Katsuki Bakugo took the sunrise personally. He'd been the strongest thing in every room he had ever entered. He had blown a hole in the entrance exam and posted the second highest villain point total in the school's recorded history. And he had walked into 1A expecting the crown, and instead there was a 6'2" orange-haired wall in the back row with a sword and a headache-inducing aura. And the worst part, the part that made Bakugo's molars grind in his sleep, was that he wasn't showing off. He wasn't competing. He wasn't even aware of him. "Hey!" Bakugo slammed a hand on his desk on day 2. "You, sword guy." Izuku looked up. "I don't know who you think you are. Izuku Midoriya." "Shut up. I'm number 1 in this class. You get that? Whatever your quirk is, whatever cute little light show you did on the field, I'm going to be at the top of every list they put up in this building, and if you get in my way, I'll blow your head off." "Got it?" Izuku looked at him for a while. "What's your name?" The classroom made a collective sound like a kettle. "Katsuki Bakugo," Bakugo said in a voice that came out of somewhere near his spine. "Okay." Izuku went back to his notebook. "Good luck, Katsuki." Bakugo did not sleep that night. The battle trial was 3 days later, and Shodaizawa reorganized the teams personally, which was unusual, and drew them out of a hat, which was a lie. Team A, Yaoyorozu and Midoriya. He read it off the paper without looking up. Team D, Bakugo and Todoroki, heroes and villains. Teams A and D are up first. The gym went completely still. "Sensei," said Ida, "isn't that an extremely unbalanced?" "Yes," said Aizawa. Momo Yaoyorozu was, at that point in her life, a girl who had never been out prepared. She'd read every hero textbook in the UA library before term started. She had a plan for the building, a plan for the stairwell, a plan involving a smoke screen and a collapsible barricade, and a 2-pronged approach that accounted for both opponents' registered quirks. She laid it out in the staging tunnel in 90 seconds, breathless. Brilliant. Izuku listened to all of it. Good, he said. Do it. If it stops working, get behind me. Behind you, she repeated. Yeah. That's the contingency? Behind you, it's held up so far. The buzzer went, and they went in, and her plan lasted 11 seconds, because Katsuki Bakugo did not enter buildings, he arrived in them, and he came down the third-floor corridor, riding an explosion with a scream in his throat and his gauntleted arm already leveled at the exact spot where Izuku's face was. He fired, point blank. Maximum yield. 60% of his stored sweat in one blast, which is a thing he had been told expressly in writing never to do to a classmate. The corridor turned white. The blast blew the windows out of the entire floor, and the roar of it hit the observation room a half-second later, and Aizawa was already reaching for the microphone with his eyes doing something dangerous. The smoke rolled up and cleared. Izuku Midoriya was standing in exactly the same place with his sword still on his shoulder. Blue lines were surfacing across his forearms and up his throat and around one eye, a lattice of them like veins traced in cold light. And they held for a second and then faded back under his skin. Blitveen. The third thing in his blood, the one nobody had explained to him yet, doing what it does. He rolled his neck like the explosion had been a stiff breeze. You use loud noises to hide your fear, Katsuki. Bakugo's face came apart. He threw the punch, not the gauntlet, the punch, a right hand with a detonation stacked behind it, the move that had ended 14 middle school fights. Izuku caught it out of the air with one bare hand. He caught it and the blast went off inside his fist and did nothing at all, and then he closed his fingers. Bakugo made a sound he had never made. His knees went. He went down to one, then both, with his hand crushed in a grip that had stopped being a hand and become a piece of construction equipment, and he snarled up through the pain with tears of pure rage in the corners of his eyes and started to say something. And Izuku released a thread of Reiatsu. Not a wave, not the beach, not the exam, not the highway. A thread. A single filament of what he actually was let out into the world through the soles of his boots for less than a second. 40 feet of corridor wall cracked from floor to ceiling. The concrete under Bakugo's knees split into 6 pieces and sank. The steel door frame at the end of the hall bent inward like a soda can. In the observation room, 13 students staggered, 2 of them into the wall and the monitors filled with static, and Kyokujiro tore her earphone jacks out of the ports and clamped both hands over her ears with a scream. Katsuki Bakugo was pressed flat to the ground. Not held. Pressed. Every muscle in his body pushing upward and losing, ribs grinding against a floor that had become his entire universe, lungs unable to draw because the air itself weighed too much to move. Izuku crouched down beside him, and the pressure eased just enough to let him breathe. And he spoke at conversational volume. You've got the best offensive quirk in this class. Maybe in the school. He said it flatly, no compliment in it, just an entry in a ledger. And you spend all of it screaming at people who aren't looking at you. If you want to be the best, start acting like it. I don't have time to play in the sandbox. He stood up. The pressure went away like a door closing. He picked up the fake nuclear weapon at the end of the corridor with one hand and said, "Hero team wins," at the intercom, and walked out. Katsuki Bakugo stayed on the floor. For 11 seconds, he stayed there, and nobody in the observation room said one word. And Shoto Todoroki came around the corner on a wave of ice, took in the wall, the floor, the door frame, and his partner face down on the ground, and made the single most sensible decision of his young life, which was to stand very still. In the observation room, Aizawa lowered the microphone he had never used. "Sensei," Ida managed. The structural. I know. Midoriya's Reiatsu output registered on the seismographs at the Nezu building, said Momo from the doorway, out of breath, because she had run up 4 flights of stairs to watch the end and had arrived in time to see none of it. My plan was very good. I'm sure it was. Aizawa took out his notebook. He wrote a single line, "Do not attempt to erase it. It isn't a quirk." Then he put the pen down and looked at the screen for a long time. They got 2 weeks of normal. That's what everybody remembers about that autumn. That there were 2 weeks in the middle where 1A was just a class, and the strange enormous boy in the back was a person you could eat lunch with, and it turned out he had opinions about cats, and a mother who sent him with 3 portions because she was convinced his classmates weren't eating. Ochako Uraraka discovered that if she sat next to him, he would eat about a third of his lunch and then push the rest at her without comment, and that if she said thank you, he would look out the window like she'd insulted him. Mina Ashido discovered that he could be made to blush one time by asking whether he'd ever had a girlfriend, and that the resulting spike in ambient spiritual pressure set off the fire alarm on the 2nd floor. Denki Kaminari. Sorry, Denki is what half the class actually called him. The boy's name is Denki Kaminari, and he answered to anything. Discovered that if you asked Izuku to arm wrestle, he would do it left-handed and hold back and still put you through a table. Eijiro Kirishima discovered that if you told Izuku Midoriya that something he had done was manly, he would go silent for 4 seconds and then say thanks, like each letter had been extracted with pliers, and that this was, in fact, the highest form of friendship available. And Katsuki Bakugo discovered a thing he never told anyone, which is that he started training an extra 3 hours a day, and that when he did, the picture in his head was no longer of a crowd cheering. It was of a corridor with a crack in the wall. 2 weeks. Then they got on a bus to the unforeseen simulation joint. The USJ is a dome. Inside it are 7 disaster zones, a plaza, a flood zone with a shipwreck in it. And on that particular Thursday, 72 villains who came out of a hole in the air like something being poured. The mist that opened them a door had a name. The hand-covered man who walked through first had a name too, and he stood in the plaza in the middle of that seething crowd with a severed hand on his face, scratching his neck raw, and said, "Is he here? Is All Might here?" "He is not," said Aizawa, walking down the stairs alone, goggles coming down over his eyes, capture weapon already unwinding. "Everyone, get to the exit, now." Then he went into 72 people, and for 4 minutes he was magnificent. You should know that. Whatever else this story is about, you should know that Shodai Aizawa walked into a crowd of 72 and dismantled 30 of them by himself, erasing quirks in mid-sentence, breaking joints, moving like something out of the last century, and every single one of them who has ever been interviewed since has said the same thing about that 4 minutes, which is that they had been told the students would be the hard part. And then something took his forearm and put it into the concrete. The Nomu did not have a face so much as an exposed brain and a mouth. It had been engineered over 4 years out of a body that had once belonged to somebody's son, and its purpose was written into it in one line: kill all might. Shock absorption, super regeneration, strength beyond measurement. It broke Aizawa's right elbow, then his left arm, then his cheekbone, and the sound of a professional hero hitting the ground is not a sound any student should have in their memory. "Erasure," said Shigaraki Tomura, crouching over him with something like affection. "So annoying. Now, where's the boy?" Because that was the other half of it, and here is where this story departs from every version you may have heard. The League of Villains had come for 2 people. Suyu Asui was in the plaza because the flood zone warp had put her there, and she had a girl from 1B on her back with a broken ankle, and she had carried her 40 meters toward the stairs, and she had run out of 40 meters. Shigaraki's hand came up in front of her face. She looked at it. She has said since that she remembers thinking about her brother and sister, and about who would make their lunches, and that she did not have time to be scared. The 5 fingers began to close, and the air split. There was no run-up. There was no dramatic entrance. There was a crack, flat and vicious, and a length of jet black steel occupying the space between Shigaraki's hand and Suyu Asui's face. And 2 of Shigaraki's fingers came off at the second knuckle and landed on the concrete with a sound like dropped chalk. Shigaraki Tomura screamed. Izuku Midoriya stood up out of the crouch he'd landed in, black coat settling around him, and glanced back once. "Get her to the stairs," he said. Tsuyu went. Then he turned around and looked at the man who had almost killed her, and his face did the thing it does. No rage in it, no snarl, just an expression of total, bottomless distaste, like he'd stepped in something on the way over. "Nomu," Shigaraki gasped, cradling his hand. "Nomu! Tear him apart! Tear him apart!" The Nomu moved faster than a 2-ton creature has any business moving. Izuku raised the sword to meet it, because he was 15, And because he had never in his life met something he could not stop by putting Zangetsu in the way, the fist came through the blade's guard, through his crossed forearms and into his chest. 3 ribs went. He felt each one as a separate event. The impact folded him around the knuckle and then launched him 60 meters through the corner of the mountain zone's rock formation, through a retaining wall, and into a pile of broken concrete at the base of the dome with a crash that the students on the stairs felt through their shoes. He lay in the rubble. Blood came out of his mouth and pooled under his cheek and ran into the dust, and one lung had stopped participating and his right arm would not answer, and the black coat was hanging off him in ribbons that had already started to fade because Bankai does not survive an owner who cannot hold it. He tried to get up, his body said no. And that is when he heard, from somewhere far away across that dome, past the roaring and the collapsing in the water, the sound of Mina Ashido screaming somebody's name. There is a moment in every story where the machinery shows. This is that moment. Here it is. He was 15 years old and he was lying in a pile of concrete with a hole in his chest, and he had one thought, and the thought was, I have to win. And it was not, I'm going to die. The thought was, they came here on a bus. They came here on a bus with their bags and their stupid costumes, and Ida had made everybody sit down, and Mineta had complained about the air conditioning, and Ochako had asked him if he ever got tired of carrying that sword, and he had said no, and she'd laughed like it was funny. They came here on a bus. I will protect them. He said it into the concrete, with blood in his mouth, so quietly that no microphone in the building recorded it. Then the USJ began to scream. Red and black energy came out of the rubble pile in a column. It was not an explosion. It was worse. It was sustained. The concrete around him did not fly away. It ablated, ground down to powder by an output that had stopped resembling a person. The water in the flood zone 800 meters away pulled back from the shore. Every light fixture in the dome burst at once. The temperature in the plaza fell 6 degrees and then rose 11 72 villains. The 42 left standing went to the ground at the same instant, a whole crowd dropping like someone had cut a wire, hands over their ears, blood coming out of noses. Kurogiri, who was made of mist and had not felt a physical sensation in 11 years, felt one. And something stood up in the middle of it. The mask came first, out of the air, over his face, bone white, growing, plating itself across his skull with a sound like ice forming on a lake, and 2 horns curling forward from the temples. Then the armor segmenting across his chest and shoulders. Then the hair growing, whipping in a wind that came from inside him down past his shoulder blades in a wild orange mane. The eyes in the mask's sockets were hollow points of light. He was taller. He was heavier. There was a hole through the center of his chest, and around it the white plate was smooth and perfect, and the ribs that had been broken 40 seconds ago were fixed or had ceased to be relevant, and it is honestly hard to say which. On the stairs, Kyokujiro fell down. Tenya Ida, who had been running for the door to fetch help and would still, in a minute, be the reason help arrived, stopped dead with one hand on the frame and turned around and could not look away. Momo Yaoyorozu, standing at the rail with an unfinished shield in her hands, said, "Izuku?" The Nomu charged. He led it. That's the part the class talks about. On the rare occasions they talk about it at all. He did not brace. He did not counter. He stood with his arms at his sides and let 2 tons of engineered muscle cover the last 40 meters and put everything it had into a straight right hand, and he raised one white-armored palm and caught it. The shockwave took the plaza fountain apart. Then he closed his fingers around the Nomu's fist and stepped in and pulled the arm out of the socket. Not cut, pulled. The way you'd pull a weed. Tendon and bone and engineered fiber out of the shoulder, and he dropped it on the ground and it lay there twitching. The Nomu's regeneration went to work immediately. Flesh boiled at the stump. A new limb began to knit, which was the entire point of it, which was the 4-year 60 billion yen answer to every hero on the register. The mask's jaw opened. Between the horns, energy began to gather. Crimson, then white at the core, a point of light that hurt to look at. A small star being made in a place that stars should never be. The floor under him turned to slag. The air went into it in a rush and made a sound like a great intake of breath. Shigaraki Tomura, 40 meters back, said, "What?" Sero. The beam was 11 meters across when it left him. It hit the Nomu and did not push it, did not throw it, did not blast it. It removed it front to back, along with the plaza, the stairs behind the plaza, the 200 meters of upper wall behind that, and the roof. The roof of the unforeseen simulation joint, a reinforced dome 800 feet in diameter, went up and outward in one piece and came apart over the training grounds. The beam kept going. It went up through the cloud layer and split it, and for 9 seconds, there was a column of crimson light standing over Musutafu that was visible from Chiba, from Yokohama, from a fishing boat 60 miles out in the bay, whose captain filmed 30 seconds of it on his phone and posted it and broke the Japanese internet before dinner. Shock absorption did nothing. Regeneration had nothing left to work with. Every biological modification the League of Villains had spent 4 years and one child's life building was gone in the space of a breath. And there was a trench of fused glass where the Nomu had been standing, and there was daylight pouring into the U.S. Silence came down. Silence came, and the hollow-eyed thing in the white mask turned around and looked at Shigaraki Tomura. Give the man this much. He had seen death. He had been raised by it. He had a hand on his face that belonged to a woman who'd loved him, and he had been promised the end of the world as an inheritance. This was a different category. His legs stopped working. His breath came out of him in a thin whine. He stood in the middle of a plaza that had a hole in the sky over it, and 42 of his people lay on the ground around him, unable to rise, and something walked toward him with its hair moving in a windless room, and he understood with perfect clarity that he was about to be erased from the record. "Sensei," he whispered. "Sensei." Izuku raised one hand and pointed a finger at him. The light gathered at the tip. Izuku. Momo Yaoyorozu came off the stairs at a dead sprint. Every instinct she had ever been taught, every line in every textbook she'd read, cover to cover, said the opposite. She went anyway, down the broken steps, across a plaza that had been vitrified, into a spiritual pressure so dense that her legs shook, and her vision closed to a tunnel and blood came out of her right nostril and ran down her chin. She reached him. She put her arms around his back, around white bone plate that was hot enough to blister her forearms, and she has the marks still, and she held on. Izuku, stop. Her voice cracked in half. We're safe. Do you hear me? We're safe. You did it. You can stop. The finger stayed up 1 beat. 2. The light at the fingertip guttered and went out. A crack ran across the mask from the left eye socket to the jaw. Then another. Then it came apart in fragments, and the fragments turned to ash before they hit the ground, and the armor went with it. And the hair fell short and the shoulders came down, and Izuku Midoriya, 15 years old, 3 ribs broken, took 1 step and collapsed into her. She went down under him. She weighed 1/3 of what he did, and she went down under him and held his head up out of the glass and yelled for help until her voice gave out. Every villain still conscious in that dome ran for the mist gate. Kurogiri took Shigaraki by the collar and pulled him through, and the last thing the leader of the League of Villains saw of the unforeseen simulation joint was a girl in a red costume with blood on her chin holding a boy's head off the ground, and a hole in the roof and light coming through it. All Might arrived 4 minutes later. He came through the doors with his shirt untucked and a scream on his lips and 40% of a lung, and he stopped 6 steps in. There was daylight in the USJ. There was a trench of glass. There was a 200-meter section of upper wall missing and the sky visible through it, and 20 students in a huddle in the middle of the plaza, and Shota Aizawa propped against a chunk of concrete with both arms broken, staring at the crater, and no villains left to punch. "Sensei," said Ochako Uraraka, on her knees with her hands full of somebody's jacket. "He's still breathing. He's still breathing. We need." Aizawa looked up at the number 1 hero, Hurricane. His face was a mess. He was in shock, and his elbow was in 3 pieces, and he said the only thing there was to say. Toshinori. He never used that name in public. That was one boy. The world found out about Izuku Midoriya on a Thursday evening in October. Not his name. UA held that back for 11 days, and it changed nothing, because there was 30 seconds of phone footage of a crimson beam standing over a city like a pillar holding up the sky, and a fishing boat captain named Ito, who became briefly the most followed man in Japan. They called it the Musutafu Light. Analysts on morning television argued about output. A physicist from Kyoto University went on air and said, with a face like a man reading his own diagnosis, that if the visible column represented even 5% of the total energy release, then the young man in question had personally exceeded the annual generating capacity of a mid-sized nuclear facility over a span of 9 seconds. And then he took his glasses off and did not put them back on. Endeavor watched the footage 40 times. In a bar in Kamino Ward, a man with staples in his face watched it once and set down his glass. And in a hospital room in Musutafu, a boy with a bandaged chest woke up on the second day with his mother asleep in the chair, and 12 classmates crammed into a room rated for 4. And the first thing he said, hoarse, to a room that had gone completely silent when his eyes opened was, "Did everybody get out?" Ochako Uraraka started crying, then Mina, then Kirishima, who denied it for a year. "Everyone got out," said Momo Yaoyorozu, who had not left and had bandages on both forearms and would not explain them to anyone. Izuku let his head go back against the pillow. "Okay," he said. Then he was asleep again, and 12 teenagers sat around a hospital bed in absolute silence, guarding a boy who could have leveled the building because it was the only thing any of them could think to do. UA held the sports festival 2 weeks later because UA is insane and because backing down would have been a headline. Attendance projections doubled inside 48 hours of the schedule being announced. Then they doubled again. The stadium seats 48,000 and they built temporary stands for 9,000 more and sold those out in 11 minutes. Every hero agency in the country sent scouts. 14 sent their number one, Present. Present Mike opened the broadcast to the largest live audience in the history of Japanese television. And in the tunnel under the stadium, 180 first-year students stood waiting to walk out, and Izuku Midoriya stood at the back of them with a cloth-wrapped cleaver on his shoulder, and something extraordinary happened. He did not suppress it. He had spent 11 years folding himself down small enough to fit in rooms. He stood in that tunnel and let out a fraction of a fraction, and the students in front of him began to feel it climbing their spines like cold water. In the stands, 48,000 people stopped talking. The scouts felt it first. The pros, the ones with the sensitivity that comes from being hit a lot. Mount Lady stood up out of her seat without meaning to. Kamui Woods put both hands on the rail. In the VIP box, Endeavor's flames guttered and he turned his head toward the tunnel mouth and did not turn it back for 4 minutes. 16 professional heroes in that stadium took their phones out and started dialing their agencies before he had even walked into the light. Then he walked into the light. 48,000 people made a sound that the broadcast microphones could not process. The audio on the official recording clips for 11 seconds. "That's him," Present Mike screamed. "Listeners, that's the one. I don't have words. I'm paid to have words." Izuku Midoriya looked up at 70,000 people and scowled at the sun. "It's bright," he said, to nobody. They had changed the events that year. Everything about that festival was changed, because Nezu had watched the USJ footage and understood that the school no longer had a curriculum. It had a phenomenon, and you do not test a phenomenon with an obstacle course. Event 1 was the obstacle course anyway, 4 kilometers, and it lasted 41 seconds. That's the whole story. He walked to the line, the gun went off, and 180 students hit the tunnel mouth in a crush, and there was a crack of air, and Izuku Midoriya was through the tunnel and over the robot barricade and across the chasm and past the minefield and standing at the finish line with the sword still on his shoulder, looking mildly annoyed that there had not been more of it. He was so far ahead that the second-place finisher, Shoto Todoroki, arrived 3 minutes and 10 seconds later to find him sitting on the finish gate with his legs hanging off it. "He didn't even draw the sword," said Present Mike. The minefield is intact. The minefield is completely intact. We spent 1.4 million yen on that minefield." Katsuki Bakugo came in third and threw his own gauntlet at a wall. Event 2 was new, and it was cruel, and the students hated it, and the audience loved it. The collapse. A grid of 140 steel platforms suspended over a lake, each one wired to drop at random intervals. Teams of 4. 8 minutes. Points for platforms held, points for opponents dropped, and the twist Nezu had built in personally. The platform under a team collapses faster the heavier the load on it, and load is measured in output, not mass, which meant that the strongest team on the field was standing on the shortest fuse. Izuku's team was as Ochako Uraraka, who could remove weight, Momo Yaoyorozu, who could build bridges out of nothing, and Fumikage Tokoyami, who had a shadow. It should be said that Momo picked the team from the tunnel in 90 seconds, and that it was, I will use a word, inspired, and that Izuku listened to the whole plan and said, "Good, do it," and that this time it worked, for 6 minutes. Ochako Uraraka kept a boy with the spiritual mass of an artillery piece floating at 0 grams, while Momo laid steel and Tokoyami swatted challengers into the water, and Izuku stood there on a platform that should have dropped in 4 seconds and did not, because the girl beside him had her hands on his back and her tongue between her teeth in concentration, and Present Mike lost his mind over it for a solid minute. Then a boy from 1B tried to take Ochako off the platform from behind. He did not touch her. He came within 11 feet, and Izuku turned around and did nothing except look at him. And the boy stepped back onto air and fell into the lake, which the officials ruled a legal elimination after a 40-minute review. Ochako laughed so hard she lost her grip, and the platform dropped 6 inches, and both of them nearly died. They won by 400 points. The tournament bracket was the part the country stayed home for. Round 1. He faced a third year. Nezu had seeded the bracket across years. Another change, another headline. A boy named Sakai with a metal skin, quirk, and a genuine future in the industry, and he came out of the gate at full sprint with his forearms locked into a wedge. Izuku drew Zangetsu. The draw was the attack. 200 pounds of cleaver, leaving the wrap and hitting the air at a speed that made the air object, and the pressure wave alone lifted Sakai off his feet, spun him twice, and deposited him 9 meters outside the boundary line into the safety netting. "Midoriya advances," said Midnight, checking her monitor twice. "In 1.5 seconds. Round 2. Tenya Ida, who had spent 2 weeks in the gym for this and who came at him in recipro burst with a form so clean it made his brother cry in the stands. Izuku met him in the center of the ring and let him hit, took the kick on his forearm, blue lines flaring, and stood there while a boy accelerating at 40 meters per second delivered his career-best strike into a limb that did not move. Then he put a hand on Ida's shoulder and set him down outside the ring like a man putting a chair back where he found it. "Your form's better than mine," he said. "You just don't weigh enough." Ida bowed to him on the spot with tears in his eyes in front of 70,000 people, and something in that gesture will matter a great deal to both of them in about 11 days. Round 3. Katsuki Bakugo. The stadium came out of its seat. He had earned it. Nobody can say he didn't. He'd taken apart 3 opponents in the bracket in under 30 seconds each, and he walked into that ring with a look on his face that had lost the rage and found something worse, something focused, and he had spent 2 weeks building one single idea. "You put me on the floor," he said. "Yeah. Never again." He detonated the entire ring surface at once. His idea, his 2 weeks of work, not an attack, a screen, 30 tons of pulverized concrete thrown up into a cloud that killed all line of sight. And then he went into the cloud silent and came at Izuku from behind with both gauntlets at full stored yield, and he fired them together into the base of his spine. The blast took the roof off the north bleacher's awning. When the smoke cleared, Izuku had one hand around each of Bakugo's wrists, and his back was smoking, and there was a burn across his shoulder blade that would take 4 days to fade. And he was looking at Katsuki Bakugo with an expression that Bakugo had never once seen aimed at him in his entire life. Approval. "Better," Izuku said. Then he threw him out of the ring, underhand, without malice, 40 feet through the air into the netting. Katsuki Bakugo lay in the net and looked up at the sky and started to laugh. And it was not a nice laugh, but it was the first honest one he'd produced since he was 6 years old. Which brings us to the final, and to Shoto Todoroki, and to the single most watched 90 seconds of footage in the history of the UA Sports Festival, he had gone through his half of the bracket without using his left side once. 4 opponents, 4 freezes, no fire. In the stands, a man made of flame sat with his arms folded and his jaw working. They stood 20 meters apart on a ring that had been resurfaced twice. "I know what you are," Todoroki said. "I watched the tapes from the USJ. I've been watching them every night." His right hand came up, and frost climbed his arm and up his shoulder and across half his face. "I'm going to lose, I know that. But I'm going to lose with half my strength, because the other half belongs to a man I'd rather die than resemble. So don't take it personally when I try to bury you." He put his hand on the ground. Half the stadium froze. Not the ring, the stadium, a wave of ice 30 feet high that went up over the boundary and up the wall and across 200 seats worth of empty overhang, glaciating in 3 seconds, the single largest output of his young life, a statement written in ice at a volume of 90,000 tons. Izuku Midoriya was somewhere inside it. 70,000 people held their breath. Then a blue-black line appeared in the ice, from the top to the bottom, and the entire glacier came apart into gravel and steam. He'd swung once, that's all. One swing of Tensa Zangetsu, and 90,000 tons of ice ceased to exist as a structure, and the meltwater came down over the ring in a rain that turned to fog in the cold, and Izuku Midoriya walked out of the fog in a black coat with the blade held low. He pointed it at Todoroki. "You think you can win a war with half your strength because of a family grudge?" The stadium went completely silent. 70,000 people. Not a sound. The broadcast audio has 40,000 frames of nothing but wind. "Your father's a bad man." Izuku's voice carried. He hadn't raised it. "That's got nothing to do with your left hand. Your left hand is yours. It's been yours since the day you were born, and you've spent 16 years letting him keep it, and every day you don't use it, you're telling him he was right about what you were made for." Todoroki's right side flared and cracked. "You don't know. I know that 10 meters behind you, there's a girl on the medical bench who your ice broke a wrist for, and I know you didn't mean to, and I know if you'd had your fire, she'd have walked off the field." Izuku raised the blade over his shoulder and black energy began to crawl down it and red bled into the black. "You want to lose to me? Fine. Everybody does, but lose as all of you." And then he shouted it and the microphones caught it. And it is on t-shirts now. It is a tattoo on 9,000 arms. It is the caption on 400 million video clips. "If miracles only happen once, what are they called the second time? Ignite your flames, Shoto." Here's what the cameras got. They got Shoto Todoroki's face. They got the exact frame where 16 years of a wall built by a 9-year-old boy in a room with his mother's blood on the floor came apart down the middle. His eyes went wide and his mouth opened, and he made a sound that was half a shout and half something wordless. And he brought his left hand up in front of his own face and stared at it like he had just now been informed that it existed. And then he screamed, and his entire left side lit. Fire went up out of him in a column 40 feet high. The temperature in the ring jumped 80 degrees in 1 second. The remaining meltwater on the concrete flashed to steam, and the steam went up into the fire, and the whole east half of the arena turned white and gold. In the VIP box, Endeavor stood up out of his seat. In the ring, half of a boy burned and half of a boy froze, and both of them worked at once for the first time in his life, and he threw everything he had ever been forbidden to have straight down the center line at the only person who had ever demanded it of him. Ice from the right. Fire from the left. Both, together, braided, roaring, coming across 20 meters of concrete like the front of a storm. Izuku Midoriya grinned. That's the other clip. That's the one the fans use. The one that got animated 11,000 times. The scowl coming off his face and the corner of his mouth pulling up, cocky and pleased and alive, a boy in a black coat looking at a wall of fire and ice coming at him, and being delighted, he swung. Getsuga Tenshō. The blast met in the exact center of the ring, black and red against gold and white. For a full second, they genuinely held, the crescent grinding against the flame front, the concrete under both of them going to powder, the shockwave rolling out in a ring and hitting the stands hard enough to knock the caps off 9,000 heads, 70,000 people put their arms over their faces. Then the light took the whole stadium. The support pylons on the north side of the arena bowed 4 inches and stayed bowed. They're still like that. They left them. There's a plaque. Every screen in the venue went out. The blast column punched straight up through the open roof, and the cloud deck over Musutafu opened in a ring 11 kilometers wide, and half of Japan looked up at the sky at the same moment for the second time that month. The steam took 90 seconds to clear. When it did, Shadow Todoroki was 19 meters outside the boundary, on his back, unburned, unbroken, breathing, unconscious for 4 minutes, with frost on his right hand and soot on his left and a smile on his face. Izuku Midoriya was standing on the center line, in the middle of a crater that had gone through the ring, through the substrate, and 11 feet into the earth beneath. Coat gone, blade down, bleeding from a split eyebrow, which was the entire extent of it. Midnight took 8 seconds to remember her job. Midoriya wins. The stadium did not cheer. That's the thing everyone gets wrong when they retell it. There was no roar. 70,000 people stood up in silence in a stadium with a hole in the roof and a crater in the floor and a boy standing in it. And they stayed standing, and it went on for 2 minutes. And to this day, nobody can explain what it was. In the medical bay an hour later, Shoto Todoroki opened his eyes and saw an enormous orange-haired boy sitting in the chair beside him, eating an orange, looking at the wall. You're awake. Why did you do that? Izuku ate a segment of the orange. Because I could have put you outside the line in the first 3 seconds, he said, and then you'd have gone home still half a person. Todoroki lay there for a while. My father is going to be insufferable. Your father is standing outside in the corridor, and he's been there 40 minutes because he doesn't know how to come in. Izuku stood up and put the orange peel in the bin. Tell him whatever you want. Just make sure the hand stays yours. He went out through the door, past a 7-foot man in flames who opened his mouth to speak, and then found that he could not. And Izuku Midoriya walked past the number 2 hero in Japan without slowing down or looking at him. In the stands, All Might sat by himself with his hands folded, looking down at the crater, smiling, and his eyes were doing the complicated thing again. Because he had spent 40 years being everybody's ceiling, and he had just watched a 15-year-old reach up and put a hand through it. And beneath the smile, in a place he did not let anybody see, he thought, I am so glad you said no. And I am so afraid of what's going to come looking for you. Internships opened 11 days later, and Izuku Midoriya received 4,192 offers, which broke a record so thoroughly that they stopped announcing records. He picked the one with the shortest letter. I saw the tape. Don't care where you come from. Come with me and we'll go somewhere loud. Mirko, no 5. Rumi Usagiyama met him at the door of her agency, looked him up and down, and punched him in the sternum with everything she had. He didn't move. Blue lines surfaced under his collarbone and faded. She grinned so wide it looked painful. Oh, she said. Oh, this is going to be a great week. They worked together like a house fire. She was the only hero in the top 10 who would run into a building without a plan, and the only one who'd ever been proud of it. And she found in Izuku Midoriya a person who did the same thing for the same reason, which is that both of them had decided a long time ago that the sound of somebody screaming was an instruction. 3 days, 9 incidents. She took him through a warehouse in Yokohama at 2 a.m, and he cleared the top 2 floors before she got up the stairs, and she called him a show-off and meant it as a marriage proposal. He learned things from her. Real things, footwork, positioning, how to take a hostage situation apart from the outside in, how to talk to a crying 8-year-old, which he was terrible at and which she made him do 4 times. You keep swinging that thing like it's the answer, she told him over ramen on the 4th night. It usually is. Yeah, and one day it won't be, and you're going to stand there with a big sword and no idea. She jabbed her chopsticks at him. Kid, you've got the biggest hammer anybody's ever seen. Learn to be a person holding it, or you'll end up something else holding you. He thought about a white thing crouched on the side of a glass building. Yeah, he said. That was the 4th night. On the 5th night, the trains came into Hosu City. Hosu burned in 11 minutes. 3 Nomu came out of a warp gate above the Hosu Ward Central District. 3, less refined than the one at the USJ, faster, feral, and released with a single instruction, which was to make noise. Buildings came down on the east side. 211 people were hospitalized in the first quarter hour. Every hero agency in the prefecture went to the streets, and Endeavor came in from the north like a comet. And under all of it, in the alleys, moving between the fires, was a man in tattered bandages with 14 professional heroes' careers on his record, who had come to Hosu because the League had opened him a door and he had decided to use it his own way. Izuku Midoriya and Mirko were in the district on a follow-up when the first building went. "Go," she said, already moving. "East side. I've got the trains. Go." He went up, he went straight up. Shunpo off a fire escape, off a balcony rail, off nothing, 400 feet and 3 steps, and he came out above the smoke line and hung there in the air over a burning city, and he looked down. He could feel all of it. That was the thing nobody understood about him and the thing that made him what he was. Every soul in Hosu Ward was a light to him, 40,000 of them, and he could feel 3 holes moving through that field where lights should have been, and he could feel the lights going out around them. He put a hand out to his side, palm open. Blue lines rose across his forearm, and the air over his fingers pulled itself into a shape, long, spare, a bow of light with a string that hummed. He'd never told anybody about this part. The man in the black cloak had refused to explain it. It worked anyway. He drew. Liched Regan. The sky over Hosu filled with arrows, not dozens. Hundreds, then 1,000, blue, white, and screaming, standing in the air above the ward in a lattice that lit the underside of the smoke, and every single one of them was aimed, and none of them was aimed at a building. They came down. The first Nomu was crossing an intersection with a bus in its hands, and it was hit 400 times in 1 second, and it stopped being a creature and became a suggestion on the pavement. The second was inside a collapsing office block, and the arrows went through 11 floors of concrete to find it. The third turned, saw the sky, and was already gone. 412 civilians in that district reported afterward that the rain of light had come down around them and had touched nothing, and that the arrows had passed within a meter of them without heat, and that it was the most beautiful thing they had ever seen. Endeavor arrived in the intersection 19 seconds later to find 3 dead Nomu and nothing to burn. They stood in the street among 1,000 fading blue lines and looked up. "Who," he said to nobody, "is doing this?" Izuku dropped to a rooftop, breathing hard because the bow cost him and he has never admitted it. And then he felt it, a light he knew. Down and to the left, 3 blocks, in an alley between a shuttered pharmacy and a parking structure. Tenya Ida's soul, bright and hard and guttering, dropping like a candle in a draft. The rooftop cracked under his push-off. What he came down into was this. Tenya Ida on the ground with his armor split and blood in his hair, and both legs unable to answer, one arm reaching for nothing. A pro-hero named Native unconscious against a wall. And crouched over Ida with a katana raised in a reverse grip, a man in bandages and a red scarf with eyes like 2 holes cut in a wall. "Another fake hero," Stain said. "You came for revenge. That's all you are. You have no right to the word." The blade started down. It stopped because there was a slab of steel in the way, and Izuku Midoriya was standing over Ida with Zangetsu held one-handed and an expression on his face that had gone somewhere past anger into a place with no weather in it. Stain looked up at him. Stain. Chizome Akaguro had fought 14 professional heroes and put every one of them down. He'd killed 17. He was the best human combatant alive in that country, and he understood, in the first half-second, that something about the geometry of this alley had changed. He went anyway. Give him that. He came off the ground at a speed that had ended careers, blade and knife, 4 strikes inside 1 breath at the throat, wrist, knee, and eye. Izuku parried all 4. He barely moved his arm. Slab of steel, 4 hard rings of contact, and Stain landed 9 feet back with his eyes narrowed and his breath even. "You have training," Stain said. "I've got 11 years." Stain came again. Write this part fast because that's how it happened. Knife low, turned. Katana at the ribs. Stopped. Stain went up the wall 3 steps, came off it upside down with both blades, and Izuku pivoted and the cleaver took the katana and bent it. Stain dropped, rolled, threw. Izuku caught the thrown knife out of the air with 2 fingers and dropped it. "You're fast," Izuku said. "Faster than anybody I've fought who breathes." Stain got the opening on the 11th exchange. He earned it. He gave up his left shoulder to do it, took a graze from the cleaver that opened him from collarbone to elbow, and in the same motion whipped a knife across Izuku's cheekbone and drew one thin line of blood. He landed. He put the blade to his tongue. Ida, on the ground, screamed, "Midoriya, don't let him." "You are paralyzed," said Stain, and for 1/3 of a second he was correct. Izuku's arm locked. His knee went stiff. Every muscle in his body received an instruction from somewhere that was not his brain, and his body, obedient, began to comply. Then his soul noticed. You could hear it. That is the part Tenya Ida talks about at conferences now, 16 years old and lying in his own blood, and he says the sound of it was like a generator coming up to speed inside a man's chest. The asphalt under Izuku's boots cracked into a starburst. The pharmacy windows on both sides of the alley burst outward. Rainwater in the gutter stood up off the ground. The paralysis in his nervous system burned out. Blood curdle works on blood. It moves through a body and takes the nerves. It has never once had to contend with a body where the blood is only one of 3 things running through the veins and where 2 of them are not from here. He rolled his shoulder. He turned his head. He looked at Stain, and Stain's face changed. The first time in 9 years that anyone had seen it happen. Izuku held Zangetsu out to the side. "You want to know what a real hero is," he said. "Fine. I'll show you the difference between us." The blade in his hand came apart. It did not break. It divided. The enormous cleaver folding down and separating into 2. And when the light left, there was a long black blade in his right hand with a hook near the tip, and a chain trailing from the pommel, and a short blade in his left, and the 2 of them were humming at each other. The air in the alley thickened. The resonance between them was audible, a low tone in the ears, and the puddles on the ground began to ring. The true shape of it, the thing the man in the black cloak had been holding back for 11 years and had handed over 4 seconds ago, in a place inside him, without a word, because his boy had finally asked the right question in the right voice. Izuku brought both blades up and crossed them. "The difference in our power is like heaven and earth." Stain lunged. Getsuga Jujisho. The cross came off the blades at the width of the alley, black and red, 2 arms of it, 1 vertical and 1 horizontal, and the vertical arm took the katana and the knife and the bandages off Stain's forearms and 11 feet of pavement, and the horizontal arm took him. It broke 4 ribs, both collarbones, and something in his left hip. It put him through the parking structure wall on the far side of the alley, through cinder block, through the concrete beyond it, through a parked van, and it kept going, and it opened the far side of that building into daylight, and the blast lit the underside of the smoke over Hosu bright enough that Endeavor 6 blocks away turned toward it. The cross-shaped scar it left in the pavement is still there. They tried to resurface it twice. It's a landmark now, there's a small brass marker, and people leave things on it. Chizome Akaguro came to rest against a support pillar 60 feet inside the parking structure with his weapons gone and his body wrecked, and before he lost consciousness, he looked back through the hole in the wall at the boy standing in the alley with 2 blades and rainwater steaming off his shoulders, and what he felt was not hatred, and it is a thing he has never publicly discussed. He was alive. He would stay alive for the trial, Inez, and for the sentence, and for the 40 years after it, and every one of those years he would remember the sound of 2 swords humming at each other in the rain. Izuku brought the blades down and crossed them, and they went back into the space they came from. Then he turned around. Tenya Ida was on the ground with his hands over his face and his shoulders shaking, and blood on his chin, and both legs useless, and everything he had come to that city carrying had just been taken off him by somebody else. His brother's chair, his brother's cape. 6 weeks of a 16-year-old boy driving himself into the ground with a thing he was too young to hold. He was crying. He was crying the way you cry when the thing you built yourself around gets finished without you. Izuku crouched in front of him. He put one hand on the back of Ida's head, which is a thing he had never done to another person in his life. And he held it there for a second. Then he stood up and looked down at him, and the sirens were coming, and the smoke was going up over Hosu. And somewhere 3 blocks away, a hero made of fire was shouting orders into a radio, and above them the clouds were opening on a sky that had a hole burned in it. "Stand up, Tenya." Ida looked up. A true hero carries his grief on his feet, not his knees. And he held out a hand. The city was still catching up. The world was still catching up. The phones were still filming, the analysts were still arguing, the men in the bar in Camino Ward were still watching, and in a chair somewhere far away, a creature made of scars and hate was learning a new name and beginning, for the first time in 160 years, to feel something like doubt. But in that alley, right then, there was a boy on the ground reaching up, and a boy standing over him, hand out, waiting. Ida's fingers closed around his wrist. That is the hinge the whole rest of this turns on, so hold on to it. A 16-year-old on his back in a Hosu alley with both legs refusing him and his brother's grief still wet on his face, reaching up and finding a wrist as thick as a fence rail and holding on. Izuku pulled. Ida came off the ground the way a coat comes off a chair. The legs took his weight for a quarter of a second before they quit. Izuku had a shoulder under his arm before he dropped. Neither of them mentioned it. Rain came down through the smoke and made mud out of the ash on the pavement, and the cross-shaped gouge in the asphalt behind them steamed like something that had been recently fed. "I couldn't." Ida started. "You're standing. That's the part that counts." Then the air over the alley split open, and a fourth one came through. Nobody had counted a fourth. The League had sent 3 Nomu into Hosu with instructions to make noise, and kept one in reserve with a different instruction, which was to collect stain from whatever was left of the situation. And it came down out of a warp gate on the pharmacy roof with a jaw hanging past its collarbone and a brain sitting on top of it like a hat. Izuku set Ida against the wall, the way a person sets down a bag of groceries. Then he turned around, and this time he didn't reach for the sword. Blue rose in his forearms. Not the lattice from the corridor at UA, not the cold web that surfaces when something tries to hurt him. This ran the other direction, outward from shoulder to knuckle, thickening as it went until both arms were traced in lines that threw light on the wet brick. The Nomu came off the roof. He stepped into it and hit it once under the sternum. The fist went in and came out the other side, and it took the spine with it. 2 tons of engineered muscle folded around his arm and stopped being an animal in the middle of its own leap. And the concussion that his knuckles did not spend on the Nomu kept traveling because it had to go somewhere, and where it went was into the 4-story building behind it. The first 2 floors of that building ceased to be load-bearing. Everything above them came down in one piece, sat and spread. A pharmacy sign hit the pavement 40 feet away and rang like a gong. Somewhere in the settling dust, a car alarm started, which felt like the smallest possible response. Izuku shook the arm off, which is the thing he had to do, and looked at the pile. "Sorry about the building," he said, to nobody in particular. Endeavor came around the corner 19 seconds later and stopped so hard that his flames went out. Understand what the number 2 hero in Japan was looking at. An alley with a cross burned into the ground. 3 dead Nomu across 2 blocks behind him, killed by 1,000 blue arrows that had come out of the sky and touched no civilian. A pro-hero unconscious against a wall. A student from UA upright against another wall with his legs ruined and his face wrecked and his eyes bright. A collapsed building. Rainwater turning to vapor off the shoulders of a 15-year-old boy who was standing in the middle of it with a slab of steel on his back and blood on his cheekbone from the only strike anyone had landed on him all night. And past the hole in the parking structure wall, 60 feet in, a man in bandages breathing wrong against a support pillar. Endeavor's mouth opened, then it closed, then it opened again. "You're a student." "Yeah." "Where is Stain?" Izuku pointed with his thumb. Endeavor looked. He was gone 11 seconds and came back with a different face on. His hip is in 3 pieces, both collarbones, 4 ribs. He is going to live. That was the idea. You decided that. He didn't put his hands on anybody who couldn't get up, Izuku said. So he gets a courtroom. That sentence would be read out in the diet twice in the following month by two people arguing opposite positions with it. The paramedics needed 2 stretchers for Chizome Akaguro because the first one they slid under him bent at the hip strap where the bone had come apart, and they had to strap the frame of the second to the frame of the first and carry him out like a man being moved on a door. Tenya Ida went out on a board with a pro hero on each corner, and one hand still gripping Izuku's sleeve until they physically had to peel it off him. Native woke up in the ambulance and asked what had happened, and the medic told him honestly that she had no idea. 6 blocks away, in an intersection full of fading blue lines, a police sergeant photographed the pavement for 4 hours and could not get a single frame that looked like evidence of anything. Endeavor stood in the alley after they took the bodies in the rain, alone, looking at the cross. They tried to resurface it twice. It came back both times, which the city engineers explained with a word they made up in a meeting. In the end, they left it and put a small brass marker at the edge of it, and by the following spring, people were leaving flowers there and coins, and once a child's drawing of an orange-haired man in a black coat, which stayed there in the weather for 11 days before someone from the ward office finally took it inside and framed it. 2 weeks after Hozu, the Hero Public Safety Commission convened a closed hearing on the 14th floor of a building in Chiyoda and invited a 15-year-old to it, 11 men and 2 women at a curved table, 1 stenographer. A screen behind them cycling stills, the highway canyon on the coast road, the trench in Battle Center B, the hole in the roof of the unforeseen simulation joint, a fishing boat's phone footage of a crimson column standing over Musutafu, the cross in Hosu. Izuku came in with the sword because he does not own a bag it fits in. And there was an argument at the door about it that he won by continuing to walk. Nezu came too and brought his own tea and sat down with his little hands folded and enjoyed the next 50 minutes more than any principal has ever enjoyed anything. They started with the file. Emitter type, Soul Resonance, registered 2010, 1 line, revised never. One of the men read it out loud and then set it down and looked at it with the expression of a man who has just found a shopping list in a murder case. Then came the offer, which was really the threat, and it came wrapped in the way these things always come wrapped. A special designation. Full license immediately, no provisional period. Deployment through a commission liaison, all engagements pre-approved, all footage reviewed, a residence provided, a handler assigned, and a clause buried at paragraph 19 and read out in a voice like a man reading a weather report, placing his operational availability at the disposal of national defense. And if I say no, Izuku said, then the 26 months of unlicensed vigilantism prior to your enrollment remain prosecutable, the woman at the center of the table said. We would prefer to be your employer, but we can be something else. Nezu sipped his tea and made a small pleased sound. Let me be clear about what troubles this room, the woman went on. Nobody at this table believes you are a criminal. What troubles us is the question of authorization. On the coast road, you removed a section of national highway. At Hosu, you brought down an occupied structure. Who authorized you, Mr. Midoriya? Under whose command were you operating? Izuku thought about it for a second, which the stenographer recorded as a 4-second pause and which everybody in that room remembers as much longer. You want to know who authorized me? Nobody did. That's the point. I beg your... There were 41 people in a shipping container on the coast road. 16 of them were children. He said it flat, no rise in it. Nobody authorized that either. It happened anyway. The paperwork on your side of the desk didn't stop it, and the paperwork on your side of the desk wasn't going to get them out of that box. I did. That's the whole thing. That's the entire argument. That is not how a hero society functions. Your hero society had 2 years of files on the district those trucks drove out of, and it filed them as low commercial value. He put a hand flat on the table. Nobody in the room ever forgot how gently he did it. I read them. Somebody left them in a drawer at a substation in Musutafu. 41 people, and the reason there was nobody there but me is that nobody who was on your payroll was ever going to be paid to go. He stood up. I'll show up. I'll sit where you tell me to sit. He picked up the cloth-wrapped cleaver and put it on his shoulder. But I want to be honest with this table about something. If a soul goes out somewhere in this city while I'm in your courtroom, I'm going to stand up and walk out of it. And there isn't a man in this building who can make that go differently. That's not a threat. That's an engineering fact about the room. The audio of that hearing leaked in 9 days. It was played on every network in the country inside 4 hours. The clip ran for the rest of that autumn under a chyron. Somebody in a newsroom wrote in about 90 seconds and then could never take back. Nobody did. That's the point. A stationery company in Osaka printed it on 11,000 notebooks without permission. 2 Diet members quoted it in the same session at each other. A retired hero on a Sunday panel show said the boy had insulted the entire institution, and the woman sitting next said that the institution had insulted 41 people in a box, and the network cut to a commercial break 11 seconds early. Izuku never commented. Not once. He was asked directly on camera exactly one time 4 months later by a reporter who ambushed him coming out of a convenience store, and what he said was, "It's cold, you should go inside." And the clip of that has 80 million views. Out in the corridor after the hearing, a thin man in an oversized suit was waiting for him by the window with a handkerchief in his fist. That was extraordinary, All Might said. That was also very stupid. Both can be true. Yes, he coughed. It went on a while, and it ended with him wiping his mouth and folding the handkerchief so the red side was inside. Young Midoriya, I have been putting off a conversation with you since a night on a beach, and I have run out of reasons. You gave the fire away. To a third year. Tagata. He wanted it so badly it was making him kind, which is rarer. A pause. You told me to find the boy it was eating. I found a young man it was feeding instead. Thank you for that. That's not the conversation. No. All Might looked out the window at Chiyoda in the rain. 16 years ago, something took a piece out of me. You felt it on the beach, and you were right, and it was worse than you guessed. He is a man. He has been alive for 160 years. He collects powers the way other men collect stamps, and he has given away one to a boy he raised in a basement, and he is the reason there was a hole in the world for the League to crawl out of. Name. He has had 100. The one that matters is all for one. All Might turned around. 6 days ago, one of my old contacts came out of the ground to tell me something and then went straight back into it. He said the old man has been asking questions about the Musutafu light, about the boy who put a column of red through the cloud layer and whether that power sits in a body and whether it can be taken out of one. The corridor was very still. He wants to know if you're a thing he can eat, All Might said. And my boy, he has never once wanted to know that and then failed to find out. Izuku shifted the sword on his shoulder. Good, he said. Good? If he's coming for me, he isn't going anywhere else. He started for the elevator. Tell your contact to stop going out. He's going to get himself killed and it won't help anybody. 6 nights later at 2:30 in the morning, a refrigerated container ship at Pier 9 in Yokohama Bay was loading cargo it had no manifest for. 4 containers. In 3 of them, packed in gel and cooled to 2 degrees, 6 nomu apiece, unfinished, mouths sewn shut for transit. In the 4th, 19 people from a homeless encampment under an expressway in Kawasaki, who had been taken over the previous 11 weeks and who were the raw material for the next batch. There were 22 men on that pier. Dr. Ujiko's people paid well and hired careful, and the operation had run out of Yokohama for 2 years without a single incident. And it had a hard rule about the encampment cargo, which was that if the pickup went wrong, the cargo went into the water in the container. The rain stopped falling on Pier 9 at 2:34 a.m. Not everywhere. In a circle. The crane operator noticed it first because his windshield went dry. Then the floodlights browned out down the whole pier as if something had leaned on the grid. Then a man on the gangway with a submachine gun found that his teeth had begun to buzz in his gums, and he had time to say one syllable into his radio. Izuku Midoriya came down onto the deck of the ship from 400 feet up, and the deck plate went out from under his boots in a starburst. He had learned things in Yokohama with Mirko, and one of them was that you clear the crew before you touch the cargo, and another was that a man with his hand on a lever is a different problem than a man with a gun. 2 men were standing at the release for Container 4, and Container 4 was over open water. "That's the wrong hand to have on that," Izuku said. The one on the left turned with a pistol and got a shot off into Izuku's chest, and it went flat against blue lines that surfaced and faded, and he had time to see that happen, which was a mercy of a kind. "I'm not here to arrest you." Zangetsu came off his back and threw both of them at hip height on the same swing. Here is the thing about a cut like that, and the story is going to be honest with you now, because this is the night the era changed. The legs stayed standing. For most of a second, they stayed standing, because a body does not receive the news all at once, and then the top halves went off the gantry and hit the container roof, and the legs folded after them a beat late, and the 2 sounds arrived separately, and every man on that pier heard both. The lever stayed where it was. 14 of the remaining 20 went to their weapons. 6 went to the water on purpose, which turned out to be the correct red. He went through the 14 in under 20 seconds, and he did not use the sword for most of it. Blew up the arms, and a man with a hardening quirk came apart at his own armor. Blew up the arms, and a forklift going 40 kilometers an hour with a driver behind it stopped being a shape. One man got up onto the container stack and started a chant with his hands to open a hole in the hull, and a swing of the cleaver removed the top 8 feet of the stack, and the man and the 2 containers below it toppled and burst on the pier. And 30 gallons of coolant gel and 18 frozen nomu slid out onto the concrete like something spilled from a shopping bag. Izuku walked down the pier and put the blade through every one of them at the base of the skull while they were still stiff. Then he came to the last man. The last man had dropped his weapon before Izuku got to him. It was on the ground, and his hands were up, and he was on his knees in a puddle with his eyes squeezed shut and his mouth going and nothing coming out of it. Izuku stepped around him. That is on the video too, and it is the part of the video that split the country, because you cannot make either argument without it. He cut a man in half at the waist, and he stepped around a man who knelt, and both of those are the same 30 seconds of footage. And a nation had to decide what that meant about him, and could not. He got Container 4 open with 2 cuts and no torch, and 19 people came out into the rain in various states, and he stood there with a sword in his hand and a dockyard full of pieces behind him, and had absolutely nothing to say to any of them, because he never does. An old man in 3 coats, who had been under that expressway for 11 years and who had a granddaughter in Nagoya he had stopped calling, put both hands on Izuku's forearm and would not let go. "You're safe now," Izuku said, and it came out like a grunt, and it was the first time he had ever said it out loud to anybody but Ochako Uraraka on a rooftop in a fake city. The footage came from a dock worker named Tanaka Hiroshi on the roof of a customs shed, who filmed 4 minutes and 11 seconds, and then went home and sat in his kitchen with his coat on until sunrise before uploading it. The country argued for a week. The word they used on television was execution, and then the word they used was rescue. And then the panels started having the same guests shout the same things at each other. And a Kyoto physicist who had taken his glasses off on air the previous month declined all invitations and released a 2-line statement saying that he was a scientist and this was somebody else's field now. The commission said nothing publicly for 9 days, and then issued a statement of 4 sentences that endorsed nothing and condemned nothing, and got mocked in 3 languages. Nezu was asked at a press conference whether UA was comfortable with what its student had done on that pier. "We are comfortable with the 19 people," he said, and smiled all the way around his face and took the next question. And Izuku Midoriya said nothing and went to class and sat by the window and turned in his homework late. Momo Yaoyorozu watched the footage 11 times. She did it in the development studio in UA support wing at midnight, with the sound off, frame by frame, and what she was looking at was not the cut. She was looking at the seam of his hoodie tearing at the shoulder when he swung. She was looking at his boots coming apart at the pier. She was looking at a phone camera going to static every time he moved, and a pierside floodlight browning out on the beat of his footsteps. Then she got a notebook and started drawing. He came in on a Thursday because she asked him to, and he stood in the middle of the studio like a piece of furniture that could kill you, and she circled him with a tape measure and did not say one word for 11 minutes. That is one of the two of them's 3 most important scenes together, and there is almost nothing in it. She measured his shoulders. She had him raise his arms, lower them, hold the cleaver overhead, hold it at rest. She put a strip of her own carbon layup against his forearm and watched the blue lattice come up under his skin at the contact and go down again, and made a note. She measured the span between his shoulder blades where the belt sat, and the belt was a belt. It was an actual leather belt from an actual trouser, and she looked at it for a long moment and wrote something down and underlined it twice. Her sleeves were pushed up. The burns on both forearms had gone from red to a pale gloss, wrist to elbow, in the shape of hands holding on. She had never once explained them in a dormitory full of teenagers who ask about everything. He had never once asked. He looked at them exactly one time that night when she reached past him for a caliper, and she saw him look, and neither of them said anything at all. And that was the entire conversation, and it was the loudest one he had that month. 6 weeks later, she handed him a coat. Black. 16 layers. A weave she had grown in her own body, one strip at a time over 41 nights, because creation runs on her lipids, and she had lost 4 kilograms making it. Plates at the shoulder and the flank, seated in channels so they would move with the swing. The thigh. A sheath across the back that took the cleaver's weight off his spine and gave it up at a shrug. A throat mic and an earpiece potted in a resin she had designed by testing 11 formulations against a boy standing in a field, letting out a filament of what he was until the 12th one stopped going to static. "It won't survive Bankai," she said. "I want you to know that up front. Nothing I can build survives Bankai." He turned the coat over in his hands. "It'll survive everything under it. And this," she tapped the earpiece, "this works inside your field. Nobody in Japan has that. Not the commission, not the pros. If you go somewhere and stop talking, I'll know it's because you chose to." Izuku Midoriya, who had spent 11 years carrying a sword in a bedsheet and a belt, stood in a support studio holding a coat that fit him and could not make his face do anything. "Say thank you," Momo said. "It's 2 words. I've seen you manage 4. "Thanks. Was that so? It's the best thing anybody ever gave me," he said, and then walked out of the room at speed like a man leaving a burning building. Momo Yaoyorozu sat down on a stool and put both hands over her face and laughed until she had to wipe her eyes. They took her 11 days later. The class was at a training lodge in the mountains above Musutafu. 4 days, endurance work. Aizawa still in a cast to the shoulder and running the whole thing off a clipboard with his teeth. It was raining on the second night. Izuku was 2 ridges out with Bakugo and Kirishima, doing a night navigation exercise, which is a detail that Katsuki Bakugo would have to live with for the rest of his life. Toga came in through a service window wearing a cook's face. Compress took Momo Yaoyorozu out of a bunk room in a marble the size of a grape, and took Tsuyu Asui off the ceiling of a corridor 11 seconds later. And twice Mice made 40 of himself in the tree line so that the 4 professional heroes on site spent 9 minutes fighting a crowd that had already left. Izuku came over the last ridge at 11 minutes past. He felt it at 4 kilometers, which is the range at which he can pick a specific soul out of a field. And what he felt was the absence of 2 of them from the lodge's cluster, and no bodies to go with the absence, which meant a warp gate, which meant that they were already anywhere. Kurogiri's gates leave a scar in the air for about a quarter of an hour if you're the kind of thing that can see it. Izuku stood in the wet grass in front of the lodge with rain hanging in a sphere around him and turned his head until he found the direction that hurt. "Kamino Ward," he said. "You don't know that," Aizawa said. He was standing in the doorway holding his broken arm against his chest with his other broken arm. "Midoriya, look at me. There is a process. The commission is standing up a joint task force right now. It will have Endeavor, Best Genist, Edge Shot, Kamui Woods, All Might. How long?" 6 hours. 8. "She's got creation," Izuku said. "You know what that's worth to a man who eats quirks. He isn't going to wait 8 hours. He isn't going to wait 1. He put the coat on. The rain stopped touching the fabric. "Midoriya, Tell them where I went, sensei. Then tell them to stay out of the buildings on the east side. He was gone before the sentence ended. The crack of it took every window out of the lodge's south face, and the seismograph at the Nezu building in Musutafu, 29 kilometers away, recorded a spike at 11:14 p.m. that the technicians logged, as they had learned to log such things that year, under the heading of transit. He did not go around the city. That is the part the foreign press could never get over. He went through the front of it at 200 feet in daylight. Because by the time he had found the third safe house and the second one had told him where the first one was, it was 10 in the morning, and Camino Ward was awake, and 40,000 phones came out of 40,000 pockets at the same time. Here's what those phones got. A boy in a black coat standing on the roof of a 9-story building with a slab of steel on his back, looking down a street at a bar with the shutters welded. Then no boy on the roof. Then the entire front wall of that bar arriving in the street across from it. Muscular came out of the dust with both arms already swollen to the width of a doorway and a grin cut into his face. And he was, and you should be fair about this, one of the 12 strongest raw bodies in the criminal registry of that country. He had killed 9 people with his hands. He got one exchange. He came in low and threw a right that had taken the roof off a police box in Nagano, and Izuku caught it on the flat of the cleaver and let the impact take him back 11 feet through a parked van, because that is how you eat a punch you have chosen to eat. And then he came off the wreck and swung once on the rise. Muscular's legs walked 3 more steps. The rest of him did not go with them, and it landed 20 feet up the street, and the 2 halves of a man arrived at different moments. And the crowd on the phones made a sound you can hear on 900 separate uploads. Moonfish came out of the second floor, all teeth. Blade Tooth spraying in a fan across the street at a speed that had ended a prison transport. Izuku raised one hand. Getsuga Tenshō. The crescent went up the teeth and up the man and up 11 meters of the building behind him and out through the roof, and the teeth came down in the street afterward in a long, rattling rain. And that was Moonfish. Mustard filled the block with gas. It was good gas. He was 17, and he was good at it. And it went into a nerve and shut a body down in 11 seconds, and it had put 4 heroes on the ground in Fukuoka. Izuku walked into the cloud, and the cloud went out from around him in a bubble, because the pressure coming off his boots was moving the air by itself. And he came out the other side and picked the boy up off his feet by the front of his coat. How old are you? 17. Then get out of this ward and never come back, Izuku said, and threw him over 4 buildings into the canal, which the commission would later classify as an arrest, and which put Mustard in a hospital for a month and out of the league forever. Compress came out of the roof access with the marbles in his hand. He was a showman. He got 2 sentences out, and they were good ones, and he had the coat and the mask and the flourish, and he held up his palm with 2 small spheres in it and told the boy in the street exactly what would happen to the girls inside them if anything happened to his hand. Izuku looked at the hand. Then he was on the roof, and the story wants you to understand that no camera has the transit, and that Mr. Compress's own testimony ends at the word hand. He took the arm off at the elbow. He caught the marbles out of the air before the arm had finished falling. And when Compress went for his mask with the other hand and give him this, he did go for it, and he was fast. Izuku put Zangetsu through his chest and out through the roof tiles and left him hanging on it for the 1.5 seconds it took to decide, and then he pulled the blade out sideways. He came down into the street with 2 glass beads in his fist and released them. And Momo Yayorozu and Tsuyuasui unfolded into the air in front of him. Momo hit the ground on her knees. Her wrists were bound in a polymer she recognized as her own work, taken from her own belt, which is a thing she would have nightmares about for a year. Tsuyu grabbed at her arm to steady her. "Behind me," Izuku said. "Both of you. Now." Twice made 90 of himself in the intersection. 90 Jin Bubai Gawaras in a ring with knives screaming over each other in a chorus of self-loathing that made the girls put their hands over their ears. and Izuku turned 3/4 of a circle with the cleaver at full extension and released a crescent that went around the intersection in an arc instead of a line, and 89 of them came apart into the mist that a copy becomes. The last one was the original, on his knees because he had put himself at the back. "Don't," Twice said. He was crying. Don't, I'm the real one. Then run. He ran, and he ran out of that ward and out of that city and out of this story, and 11 months later he turned himself in at a police box in Sendai with a duffel bag and a written list, and it broke the League's logistics arm in half. Toga came at Izuku's back with a knife in each hand and a smile on her face and a plan she had built out of watching him for 2 months and got within 4 feet, and then a filament of Reiatsu came off him through the soles of his boots and put her flat into the pavement so hard that it broke 2 of her ribs and both of her wrists. He did not turn around. "You touched her," he said. "She's so pretty. You're going to be somebody else's problem in about 9 minutes. He walked past her. "Bleed on your own for a while. See how you like it." She dragged herself into a drain and out of the ward, and she would come back, and she should not have. Dabi burned the whole street. It came up the road in a wall 3 stories high. The good flame, the blue, the one he had been working on since he was 11 years old to make his father look at him. And it hit a boy in a black coat standing in front of 2 girls with the blade planted in the asphalt, and it went around him. The coat held. The plates at the shoulder glowed and held. Momo Yaoyorozu crouched behind him with her arms over Tsuyu, felt the temperature at her back go to something like an oven door and stay there, and never once get past. 16 layers, 41 nights, 4 kilograms. When the flame guttered, Izuku pulled the sword out of the road, and Dabi looked at him across 100 feet of burning street, with his hands still up, and made the first sensible decision anybody in the League of Villains had made all morning. "Kurogiri," he said. "Now." The mist gate opened behind him, and he stepped back into it, and the gate stayed open for 1 more second than it should have, because the thing that operated it had never once in 11 years needed to be afraid. Izuku put a hand into the gate and closed his fist on something inside the mist. You have to understand that Kurogiri was not a man wearing fog. Kurogiri was the fog, a warp made out of a person. And the reason no hero had ever been able to hold him is that there was nothing in there to hold. There was, however, a soul in there. Izuku Midoriya has been able to see souls since he was 4 years old, and he had a hand in the middle of one now, and the blue lines came up his arm as far as the shoulder. "Sorry," he said. "You were somebody once. It's over." He pulled, and the mist came out of the gate in a rope, and the gate closed on nothing, and what was left in his fist he cut once. There was a sound like a held breath being let go all at once in a very large room, and a metal collar hit the pavement, and the League of Villains lost the ability to be anywhere they wanted for the rest of their existence. Every strategist in the country would write about that afternoon later, and they would all say the same thing in different jargon. The 4 seconds in which the warp gate ceased to exist were the 4 seconds the war became winnable. The street went silent. Momo got Tsuyu's arm over her shoulder and stood up in the middle of a road with pieces of 8 people on it and 100 phone cameras pointed down at them from balconies. And Izuku turned around to look at her and opened his mouth, and a building fell over, not from an attack. It fell over because a hand came out through the 4th floor of it and closed on the load-bearing column and squeezed, and the whole structure sat down into its own footprint, and a man walked out of the dust in a black 3-piece suit with a face made of scars and a hose where his mouth should be. The temperature of the story changes here. "Oh, you are wonderful," said all for one. Izuku put himself between that voice and 2 girls without appearing to move. "Do you know what I felt on the night you were born? Nothing at all. I had men in every registry office in this country, and I never once heard your name." The old man came up the street, and the pieces of muscular were in his way, and he stepped over them without a downward glance. And then you put a hole in a cloud layer, and I understood that something had been growing in my garden for 15 years with the lights off. I have taken 411 quirks out of 411 bodies. Boy, I want to see the inside of you the way a man wants to see the inside of a wrapped gift. Take one more step toward them, Izuku said, and this is over in 11 seconds. All for One laughed and took the step, and the next 4 minutes cost the city of Musutafu, Kamino Ward, 11 billion yen and the entire eastern skyline. He is not a joke. Get that out of your head now. The old man came in with spring-like limbs and air cannon and kinetic booster stacked in the same movement and hit Izuku Midoriya square in the chest with a fist that was carrying 9 separate quirks. And it took him off his feet and through 3 buildings and out the other side of the block, and the shockwave took every window in a 400-meter radius. Izuku came back through the hole he had made with the cleaver overhead. They went up. That is what the footage shows. 2 figures going up a burning district in flashes, one of them cracking the air, the other of them tearing the tops off buildings for something to throw, and the concussions of them. Meeting arriving on the ground a half-second late each time like the world's worst weather. All for One took a Getsuga Tenshō at 40 meters and absorbed most of it into a quirk that ate shock. And the part he did not absorb removed his left leg below the knee, and he grew it back in 11 seconds while laughing. Izuku took a hypersonic strike to the ribs that broke 4 of them, and a rot touch on his shoulder that took the skin down to the bone in an area the size of a hand, and a stolen thing that reached into his lungs and tried to stop them. And bnha came up over his whole body in a lattice and burned it out of him. They came down together into the intersection at the center of the ward, and All for One had a hand around Izuku's throat, and the whole street was on fire. And the old man leaned in with his ruined face right up against a boy's face and said the thing he had been rehearsing. "Where are they, boy? Because I have already sent men, and they are already there. And while you and I have been having this delightful afternoon, I have learned everything I ever needed to know." He turned Izuku's head with his thumb so he could see up the street. Momo Yaoyorozu was standing in the intersection 200 meters north. She had put Tsuyu behind a delivery truck. She had built a shield out of her own arm in 11 seconds, and she was standing in front of it with her nose bleeding from the pressure field of 2 monsters fighting 50 meters over her head, and there was a man in a coat coming across the road toward her with a knife. "There," said All for One, delighted. "There it is. There's the one." Izuku Midoriya went very still in his hand, and then he cut his own palm open on the edge of Zangetsu. The story slows down for this, because it deserves it, and because it is the moment the century turned. He dragged his left hand along the cleaver's edge until the blood came, and he closed that hand around the flat of the blade, and the blood went into the light that was already gathering there, and the light stopped being light. The air around the edge began to warp. Bend, refract, come apart. The buildings behind the blade went crooked, then doubled, then smeared, and there was a sound coming off it that no microphone in Kamino Ward recorded correctly. A low grinding note like a door being opened in a place that had never had a door. All for One, who had been alive for 160 years, felt something he had genuinely forgotten. "What is that?" he said. "Gran Rey Cero." The beam left the blade at 4 meters across, and it did not travel so much as arrive. It went through All for One's right arm at the shoulder, and his left arm at the shoulder, and it kept going northeast through the intersection, through 11 buildings, through the elevated expressway, through the flood wall, and out over Tokyo Bay, where it opened a trench in the water 1,100 meters long that took 4 minutes to close, and put a wave over the Chiba shoreline that the Coast Guard is still writing papers about. 2 arms hit the pavement. All for the 2 arms hit the pavement. All for One stood in the middle of the street, with his suit jacket hang open at both sleeves, and a hole through the top of his chest, where the beam had scraped him on the way past, and he looked down at his own arms on the road. And his regeneration reached for the stumps, and found that the wounds would not close, because a Gran Rey Cero does not leave a surface to work with, and a man who had never once in 160 years made a decision out of fear made one. "Tomura," he said. The boy with the hand on his face was 11 kilometers away in a room under a bar, and every camera in that building went out at once, and something went out of the old man in the street and went into him, and the thing left standing in the intersection of Kamino Ward suddenly had a very different way of holding its shoulders. "I know what you love now," it said, with the last of the voice it had. "I am going to be more careful with you than I have ever been with anything. And when I come back, boy, I am going to start with the girl in the red costume." Izuku took his head off. It did not kill him, of course. There was nothing in there by then. But it ended the conversation, and the body came down in the road in 2 pieces. And the League of Villains went to ground for 4 months with a leader who had 160 years of stolen power screaming inside his skull and no gate to travel through. The Joint Task Force arrived 9 minutes later. All Might came out of a truck in his hero form and got 11 steps into that ward before he had to stop because there was nothing to do. Endeavor stood in the intersection and turned around 360 degrees and did not speak for 2 full minutes. Best Jeanist knelt down by a pair of arms in the road and said, in a voice that made it onto a live feed, "God have mercy, that's him. That's actually him." And then stood up and walked away from the microphones. The eastern skyline of Kamino Ward was gone. 11 blocks. A crater at the intersection 11 meters deep. A trench across Tokyo Bay. 6 people dead, all of them criminals, and 41,000 civilians evacuated by the ward office in 19 minutes because the ward office had been drilling for exactly this since October, and every one of them survived. Izuku Midoriya walked out of it up the middle of the road with a girl in his arms. She was conscious. She had insisted on walking and had gotten 11 steps before her legs went, and he had picked her up without discussion the way he picks up everything. And she had her face against the plate at his shoulder and both hands in the collar of a coat she had made with her own body. There were no buildings on either side of that street. That is the photograph, the one on the front of every paper on Earth the next morning, the one in the textbooks now, the one that hangs in the lobby at UA. A road with rubble to the horizon on both sides and a boy in a torn black coat and a girl in his arms with blood on her chin. "You came alone," she said. "Yeah." "That was stupid." "Yeah." "Don't do it again." "I'm going to do it again," he said, and she laughed, and then made a sound that was the other thing, and pressed her forehead into his collarbone and stayed there. Halfway down that road, he stopped walking. He said, "Your name." He said, "My costume." He said, "The one." Izuku looked at the end of the street where the lights were. "He looked at you, and he understood what you are to me in about a second and a half. And I've had 11 weeks, and I haven't managed it." Momo Yaoyorozu, in the arms of the most powerful thing in Japan, in the ruins of Kamino Ward, decided that she was going to be brave exactly one time. "Then take your time," she said. "I'll be somewhere you can reach." He carried her the rest of the way and handed her to a paramedic, and the paramedic asked him if he was injured, and he said no. With 4 broken ribs and a hole in his shoulder, you could have set a cup in, and then he sat down on a piece of a building and did not stand up again for 20 minutes. Which brings us to the tunnels, and to a man with 6 hands, and to the worst 400 days anybody in this story ever spent. The intelligence came in through Sir Night Eye's agency in February. A Yakuza remnant called the Shi Hasaikai, a man named Kai Chisaki who called himself Overhaul, and a bullet, an actual round, in an actual magazine that could take a quirk out of a person permanently, and which was being manufactured out of the blood of a child. The child was 6. Her name was Eri. She had been in a basement for 411 days, and her arms and legs had been taken off and put back on more times than the medical report was willing to number, because the process required disassembly, and Shisaki found disassembly restful. The commission scheduled the raid for the 3rd week of March, pending warrants. Izuku Midoriya read the file on a Tuesday evening. I am going to say the name of the day and let it stand because he remembered which day it was for the rest of his life, and asked one question, which was how long the warrants would take. 3 weeks, Night Eye said. Perhaps 4. The structure of the compound requires... She's been down there for 400 days. Yes. How many of those days were warrants? Night Eye, who could see the future and had spent his entire life being the smartest man in every room, sat in his office and had no answer. Izuku went that night with exactly one person. because exactly one person in the top 10 would come without a warrant, and she brought a smile to the front door. "So we're not waiting," Mirko said. "I'm not waiting. You can wait." "Kid, I have been waiting since I was 9. She rolled her shoulders till they cracked. "Front or back?" "There's a front." "Then I'm the front." The compound above ground lasted 11 minutes. What was under it is another matter, and the story is going to walk you down there because you should know what he found. The tunnels ran 4 levels. They were faced in stone and lit in a way that made everything the color of an old bruise. And they were built as a shape, a spiral folding inward, so that a man coming down had to keep making the same turn until he lost the direction he came from. Chisaki's people were waiting in them. There was a man who made the floor into a mouth. There was a man who came out of the walls with a saw. There was a doctor in a mask who had drawn 1,100 milliliters of blood out of a 6-year-old that month alone, and who had a chart with her name spelled wrong on it. Mirko took a knife through the thigh on the 2nd level and kept going for another 11 minutes, and then went down at a junction and could not get up. And Izuku put her against a wall and left her a radio and said, "Don't die, I'll be back." And she said, "You'd better be, I want to see it." And she meant it, and she watched it later on a hospital monitor and cried, which she has always denied. On the 3rd level, there was a room with a drain in the middle of the floor. Izuku stood in that room for 11 seconds. There were 19 souls worth of residue in it, and none of them were still attached to bodies. There was a child's sock under the table he stopped suppressing. He had spent 11 years folding his presents down small enough to fit in rooms since he was 6 years old, since the windows started humming at Aldera. He let it all the way out on the 3rd level of the Shi Hasaikai compound, and 40 men in those tunnels went to the floor and stayed there, and the stone in the walls cracked from one end of the spiral to the other, and every light in 4 levels burst at once and stayed burst. Above ground, in the truck, a technician watched a seismograph needle come off the paper and said out loud, "That's underneath us." Chisaki met him on the 4th level with the girl in one hand. He had merged himself with 2 Nomu by then, and he was a thing 11 feet tall with a torso made of other people's arms and a face that was still recognizably a man's. And he had Eri by the wrist, holding her up off the ground, her feet kicking in the air, her mouth open in a shape that had stopped making sound days ago. "You're the highway," Chisaki said. "You're the light over the bay. Do you know what I could build out of you? Do you know what a properly ordered world?" His hand came apart at the seam. Izuku's chest opened in a line from collarbone to hip, with a wet sound, because that is what overhaul does. Flesh, muscle, the plates of Momo's coat, the ribs behind them. A body taken to pieces along a line a man drew with his palm as he passed. Chisaki had done this to 11 people. Every one of them had come apart on the floor. Izuku Midoriya did not come apart. Blue lines went up through the wound as it opened, a lattice running the length of the cut and closing it from the inside, and the 2 halves of him were held together by something with no interest in being reasonable, and he took 1 step forward with his chest hanging open and closing at the same time and got his hand on Chisaki's arm. "That's the 2nd time somebody's tried to take me apart from the inside," he said. "Doesn't take." Then Chisaki, panicking, did the one thing available to him. He put a hand on the girl. He had touched her 400 times. He had done it as punishment, and he had done it as bookkeeping. He did it now in front of a witness, one time with his palm flat on the top of her head, to make the boy stop. She screamed. "You had 1 chance," is what Izuku said, and it came out with nothing in it at all. "You had 1 chance to take your hand off her." He took the arm at the elbow, it hit the stone, and it lay there with the fingers still moving. He took the other arm the same way, and that one landed 3 feet from the first, and the 2 thumps came a half second apart, and Chisaki's mouth made a shape that a mouth makes exactly once. Then Izuku put the sword in the floor because he wanted his hands blue up the arms. The fist went into the center of the merged thing and through it and out the back of it, and the hole it made was the width of a man's shoulders. And what continued past that hole went into the wall of the 4th level and took out 11 meters of stone and the corridor behind it and the water table under that, and cold water came pouring in over the floor. What was left had 1 working eye and part of a jaw and 11 arms that had gone slack. Izuku picked it up by the head with 1 hand. "Look at her," he said. "You're going to look at her while you go." And then he closed his hand, and there was 1 sound, and the tunnels were finished with Kai Chisaki. He turned around in a flooding basement with a hole in his chest and a hole in the wall, and the water rising past his ankles. And there was a 6-year-old girl standing in it with her nightgown soaked to the knee and both arms hanging, and her horn chipped, looking up at him. Izuku Midoriya, who could level the district above them, went down on 1 knee in the water. "You're safe now," he said. Eri did not say anything for 4 months after that day. But she walked to him in the water, and she put both arms around his neck, and she locked her hands together behind it, and she did not let go. Not on the stairs, not on the 3rd level, not when he shifted her to pick up Mirko under his other arm. Not at the surface, not in the ambulance, not for 6 hours, not for anything. He came up out of that hole into a March morning with a hero under 1 arm and a child around his neck and his chest held shut by something that isn't a quirk. And there were 41 people at the top of those stairs. Class 1A was there because Momo Yaoyorozu had gotten on a bus at 4 a.m. with 19 teenagers and told a driver where to go and been extremely persuasive about it. And they were standing in a line at the top of the stairs in their gym uniforms with blankets and water, and Kirishima crying openly, and Bakugo standing at the end with his arms folded looking at the sky. Ochako Uraraka got to him first and took the little girl's weight without being asked, and could not because Eri would not be taken. "She's got a grip," Ochako said. "She's got a grip," Izuku agreed. "You're bleeding through your—" "I know." Momo arrived with a stretcher she had made on the bus and looked at the front of his coat, at 16 layers of 41 Nights opened in a line from collarbone to hip, and her face did something complicated. "I'll rebuild it," she said. It held. "It didn't hold, it's in 2 pieces. It held long enough to matter," Izuku said. "That's what holding is." Eri Chisaki, the courts gave her a different family name inside the year, did not let go of him for 6 hours. She went into surgery holding a piece of his sleeve, which Momo had cut off at the shoulder with her own blade so that the anesthesiologist could work. When she came out of it, she asked for him in a whisper, in the first words she had used in 411 days, and the nurse who heard it had to leave the room to compose herself. He visited 11 times that spring, which is a thing he did badly, because the story wants you to know that Izuku Midoriya could take a 160-year-old monster's arms off at the shoulder and could not, at any point in his life, manage a conversation with a small child. She taught him a card game with rules she invented as she went. He lost every time, on purpose at first, and then eventually for real, and he complained about it, and she laughed. And Mina Ashido filmed 9 seconds of it from the doorway and never showed it to anybody, which is the single most restrained thing anyone in that class ever did. And then the sky over Musutafu opened, and every argument in Japan about the ethics of one boy's sword became irrelevant in the space of about 4 minutes. Here is the part nobody could have planned for, and the story has to be straight with you. It was his fault, not blameworthy, but causal. When something puts a crimson beam through a cloud layer and a black and red cross through a city block and a Gran Rey Cerro across Tokyo Bay, it makes noise in a place that is not here. Camino was the loudest thing that had happened on that side of the wall in 600 years. Something on the other side heard it and came to look and found the wall thin. It started at 11:04 in the morning on a Saturday in June in the air above Musutafu Station in front of 11,000 commuters and 4 traffic cameras and a live weather broadcast. The sky tore in a line about 200 meters long, edge first like fabric giving up, and what came through was white and huge and had a mask for a face. The first one took 19 people off the station plaza in 90 seconds. Not killed. Took. Understand the difference, because Japan learned it that morning in the worst possible way. The bodies stayed. That was what put the country on the floor. 19 people fell down on the concourse with their eyes open and their hearts beating and nothing in them, and the paramedics could find no injury at all, and the machines said they were alive, and they were never anything again. Then the tier widened, and there were 11 of them, and then 40. Mount Lady went to 200 feet and swung, and her hand passed through a thing the size of a bus without meeting it. Tang, Kamui Woods put 11 tons of timber through the same volume of air and hit the far wall of the station. Death Arms punched something and broke his own wrist on nothing at all. An Endeavor came down out of the sky over the plaza and put a jet of flame through the center of one, and it went through, and the thing turned its head toward him and opened a mouth full of nothing. And the number 2 hero in Japan learned in 1 second that he had spent his entire life training for a category of problem that had just stopped being the only category. The live feed from that broadcast, 11 minutes of it, uncut, before the network finally cut away, is the most watched piece of video in Japanese history. At minute 6, a top 10 hero named Ryukyu, in dragon form, 40 meters long, watched a thing lift a man in a business suit off a pedestrian bridge and hold him up, and she went for it with everything she had, and passed through it, and hit the bridge, and the bridge came down, and the man was already empty. She landed on the road in her human form and put her hands on the asphalt and said, to a live microphone, in front of 40,000 people watching at home, "I can't touch it. I can't touch it. Somebody tell me what to do." Nobody told her, because nobody knew. The Hero Public Safety Commission's entire operational doctrine, 111 years of it, assumed that a threat could be hit. At 11:19 a.m., that assumption stopped being true. Live, in front of the whole country, and the institution had a full existential collapse on air, and the story is not going to mock a single one of them for it, because they kept going in anyway. 11 pro heroes went into that plaza knowing their quirks did nothing. 4 of them came back with souls in their bodies. That should be written somewhere permanent. Izuku Midoriya arrived at 11:21. He came down through the tier itself, which is a detail people miss. He went up and over and came down through the widening line in the sky so that the first thing anybody saw was a boy in a black coat falling out of a hole in the world with a cleaver on his back and both hands empty. Then he drew. For the next 11 hours, he fought across an entire city, and there is no way to write it as one battle. So the story will tell you what the 11 hours contained. They contained him teaching at speed in the field to professionals twice his age. He got on Momo's rig, the one thing in Japan that worked inside his field, and Momo Yaoyorozu sat in the UA command trailer with a headset and became the voice of the entire operation for 11 hours straight, relaying from the only person on Earth who could see the enemy to every agency in the prefecture. Do not evacuate west. The west has 4. Ryukyu, get out of that intersection. There is one standing where you are looking. Endeavor, your flames do nothing, but the heat moves the air and he can see the air. Keep making heat and stop trying to hit them. They contained Ochako Uraraka floating 19 unconscious civilians out of a plaza 6 at a time, while things she could not see moved past her on both sides because a boy on a rooftop had told her over the radio exactly which lane to walk in, and she walked in it and did not ask a single question. They contained the moment at 3:40 in the afternoon when a herd came through at once. 60 of the huge slow ones, the ones the size of buildings, stacking up in the air over the bay in a column that blotted the sun. And Izuku Midoriya stood on the roof of the Musutafu Sky Building and pulled the mask onto his own face. He raised one hand. The light that gathered over his open palm was black, not shadowed, not smoked, black, with a rim of red around it like an eclipse, and the whole harbor went out. Every camera pointed at him lost its image. The temperature on that rooftop dropped 11 degrees, and the air went into his palm from every direction at once with a sound like a building inhaling. Cerro Oscuras. The black sun left his hand, and it was 200 meters across. It went out over Tokyo Bay and up, and it did not stop at the herd. It removed the herd, all 60, and the column of them and the tier they were coming out of, and then it kept going up through 11 kilometers of atmosphere and opened the cloud deck from Musutafu to Chiba to the horizon in a corridor that satellites photographed for the next 4 hours. Regeneration did nothing. Absorption did nothing. They were creatures made out of a hunger that had eaten souls for 600 years. And a black sun went through the middle of them and left a silence with a shape. The seismographs at 3 universities failed simultaneously and had to be recalibrated. A physicist in Kyoto, the same one, and this time he kept his glasses on, went on air that evening and said, "I want to be careful. What I am about to say is not a figure of speech. I do not believe the young man's output has an upper bound that we have observed. I believe we have only ever seen him choose a number." At 7-Eleven that evening, in a park in the eastern part of the city, in the rain, Izuku Midoriya closed his eyes in the middle of a fight and went somewhere else. The sideways city was underwater. Half the buildings were gone. The sky where the ground should be had a black line across it. The man in the black cloak stood on the glass wall of a skyscraper with rain coming up past him instead of down, and for the first time in 11 years he did not look like a teacher. "You've been lying to me since I was 4, Izuku said. "I have been failing to speak. There is a difference, and it is a small one, and I am ashamed of it. Tell me what I am." And the man in the black cloak, who had been a coward about exactly one subject for 11 years, finally stopped. "Your mother's line is old," he said, "older than Quirks by 600 years. Her people put arrows in the air and called it a birthright, and they were hunted for it. And the last of them married a man with a small quirk in Shizuoka and never told her daughter a word because the ones who told their daughters died. Inko Midoriya has never known what she is. She passed it to you whole. That's the arrows. That's the arrows. That's the lines in your skin. That's the reason a thing in a park recognized you before it recognized her, boy. You were lit up like a lamp on a dock. It didn't come for a woman and a child. It came for you, and she put her body in the way, and it took her instead." Izuku stood on the side of a building in his own soul and felt 11 years reorganize themselves. "And you," he said. "I am the other half of your inheritance, and I am the reason the first half never killed you, and there was a third thing in the room that night, and I have let you believe it was a parasite." The man's coat moved in air that was still. "You have 3 things in you. One is your mother's. One is a power that walks between the living and what comes after. And one is what happens when the second one is put into a 4-year-old who has decided he is going to save somebody. It is not a demon, Izuku. It is your grief. It has teeth because you gave it teeth." Somewhere further down in the water, something white was listening. "Say the word," said the man in the black cloak. "It's your mother's word, and you have never once been given it, and I'm giving it to you late. Vollständig." Above a park in Musutafu in the rain at 7-Eleven in the evening, a boy came off the ground 11 meters and stayed there. The light went up his arms and did not stop at his arms. It came out of his back in 2 wings, the width of a road, blue-white, structured, with lines running through them like the ribs of something built. And behind him, in the air, a cross of light stood up 4 stories tall and hung there, and the rain in a 200-meter radius went upward and did not come back down. He did not need a bow anymore. The arrows simply arrived when he wanted them. 11 hours of hunting, and the last of it took 4 minutes. Because something came through the tear at the end, and it was the reason for all of it. It was long and pale, and it had 11 lures hanging off it, and it opened a mouth full of hooks and spoke in a voice that came from behind the teeth, and it said that it had made the 1 in the park, and the 4 in Nagoya, and the 9 in Sapporo, and that it had been seeding this side of the wall for 200 years, and that it had never once had a lamp as bright as the one in front of it now. The registry that nobody keeps has a name for it. Amuchi, the netcaster. "You made the fisher," Izuku said. "I made 40 of them. I put them where the lights were bright and I let them grow fat." The hooks moved. "You were a very bright light, boy. I remember choosing that park." Izuku Midoriya hung in the air with wings of light and a cross behind him and thought about a woman laughing under an umbrella too small for 2 people. "She was wearing a green cardigan," he said. "It was the one she wore when she wasn't at work. There was a lizard on the path and I wanted to keep it, and she was laughing at me about it, and 11 years later, she still can't sit up straight for more than an hour because of what your fish did to her stomach. The arrows came into being in the air around him, and there were thousands. The umbrella went into a storm drain. It's still down there. I've looked. Boy, you chose the park. Then he raised one hand and did not name the technique because the story has already given it a name, and this was something quieter and worse. Every arrow in the sky over Musutafu turned inward at once and went through the netcaster from 11,000 directions, and there was nothing left in the air at all. Not ash, not a mask, not a sound, and the tear in the sky closed behind it like a mouth deciding against speech. He came down in the wet grass and the wings went out. By the end of that week, every government on Earth had reorganized around a new fact, and the new fact was this: there are two kinds of threat now, and one man can fight both. The United States sent a delegation. The United Nations convened a special committee whose acronym nobody could pronounce. 11 countries began programs to find their own, and none of them found anything, because there was nothing to find. Izuku Midoriya was invited onto a talk show and said 11 words in 9 minutes, and one of them was, no. And the host had to fill the rest of the time herself, and the ratings were the highest in the network's history. Katsuki Bakugo watched the Cerro Oscura's footage in the common room of the dormitory with his hands on top of his head and said to the ceiling, "That's not a person, that's weather," and then went to the gym at 11 o'clock at night and stayed there until 2. And Inko Midoriya sat in her kitchen and was told by her son what her mother had never told her, and cried for 11 minutes, and then said the thing that made him sit down. "So it was me," she said. "It came for you because of what I put in you. Mom, I gave it to you and I gave it to it. You put yourself in front of it," Izuku said. That's the only part of that night that mattered, and it's the only reason there's anything standing here. The war came in October, and the country was as ready as a country can be, and it was nowhere near enough. They found the base under Jaku General Hospital because Twice's list, mailed from Sendai, had 11 addresses on it. 411 pro-heroes deployed simultaneously across 3 prefectures, the largest single hero operation in world history. And they went in at 4:10 in the morning at 11 separate sites, and the plan was good. And the plan lasted about 6 minutes, because Shigaraki Tomura came out of a tank early. Dr. Ujiko had wanted 11 more weeks. What came out of that fluid was 75% finished, and it was already more than the register had a word for. A boy with white hair and a stolen power sitting behind his eyes, and a decay quirk that had been fed and fed and fed until it stopped being a touch and became a radius. He put his hand on the floor of the hospital's 4th basement level, and the entire building came apart into powder from the ground up, and the powder kept spreading, and it did not stop at the property line. 2 kilometers in 11 minutes. Then 4. Roads, houses, a train line, a shopping arcade, 1,100 civilians in a shelter whose ceiling turned to dust. And the shelter's evacuation held only because Ochako Uraraka and 11 students from 1A and 1B floated 400 people out over a decaying street in 19 trips. Gaigan Tamakia woke up and started walking, and where he walked, everything under his feet ceased to be architecture, and he was coming to his master. And there were 60 kilometers of populated prefecture between them. Dabi went up over Fukuoka with everything he had and burned 11 blocks of it in 90 minutes. And killed 41 people, which is a number this story is going to put down and leave there. And the sky over 3 prefectures filled with 130 Nomu in waves released in volume for the first and last time. Izuku Midoriya fought that war for 9 hours, and for the first 8 of them, he was winning it. He hit the first Nomu wave at 440 with a Getsuga Tenshō off the top of a water tower and took 30 out of the air in one crescent. He caught Gigantomakia at the prefecture line at 511 and put a Bankai scale cut into the ground in front of him, 11 meters deep, and rolled him into it and buried a monster the size of an apartment block under a hillside, and it held him for 2 hours, which was worth more than killing him at that moment, because Izuku had somewhere else to be. He got to Fukuoka at 6:04, Dabi was in the air over the city with the blue flame coming off him in a column, and he saw the boy in the black coat coming, and he was, at last, honest with himself about how this ended, and he went for the biggest thing he could reach on the way out, which was a residential tower with 400 people in it. Izuku hit him in the air, blew up the arms, barehanded, one strike, and Tuya Todoroki went out of the sky across 11 kilometers and into the water off the coast, and the flame went out of him halfway there. And the story is not going to pretend that Shoto Todoroki did not watch that happen on a monitor in a staging area and put his hand over his mouth. He came back and found Shoto 40 minutes later on a road outside Jaku, kneeling in the dust next to his father. Endeavor was alive. Endeavor would keep being alive for 11 more years and would spend all of them in front of cameras, apologizing. What he was on that road was a man with the whole left side of his body decayed to the bone and a son holding his head out of the powder. And Shoto Todoroki had used both his ice and his fire for 6 straight hours and had nothing left in either hand and was making a sound that a person makes once. Izuku Midoriya stopped running for 11 seconds. He was going to say something, Shoto said. He was going to say something to me, and it turned into I can't lift him. My legs won't. Stand up, Shoto. I can't. Stand up. A true hero carries his grief on his feet. He crouched and got the number 2 hero over one shoulder like a rolled carpet and stood, and put the other hand under Shoto's arm and pulled him upright too. You're going to hold your father's hand and walk beside me to the medical line, and it's 400 meters, and you're going to do it on your feet. Go. They went, and Shoto Todoroki did it on his feet. Then, at 12:41 in the afternoon, in the middle of a decayed street on the eastern edge of Jaku, everything went wrong at once. Shigaraki Tamura had spent 4 months with 160 years of stolen power screaming inside his skull, and he had spent every night of it watching 11 seconds of footage from the unforeseen simulation joint. A girl in a red costume with blood on her chin, holding a monster's head off the ground. He had never once forgotten it. He had built the entire day around it. Momo Yaoyorozu was in the field because there was nowhere else for her to be. She was the only person in Japan whose equipment worked inside Izuku's field, and she was running the Eastern Relay out of a mobile unit she had built herself. And she had put that unit 1,100 meters behind the line, which was the correct distance, right up until Gigantomachia came out of a hillside 4 kilometers early and the line moved. Shigaraki came out of the dust behind her vehicle at 12:41 and put his hand on the roof of it, and the roof went to powder. And she came out through the side door, rolling with her arm already turning into a shield. She got 11 meters. He caught her by the left forearm, the left one, the burned one, the one with a handprint of gloss on it from a night in October, and 4 of his fingers closed on it, and the arm began to go. She did not scream. She has said since, on the one occasion she ever discussed it, that she remembers thinking about the relay and about whether the Eastern agencies would lose the feed. Izuku heard it on the earpiece. He crossed 11 kilometers in 4 seconds, which is a number the Commission's after-action report includes without comment, and he came down into that street with Zangetsu already swinging, and he took Shigaraki Tomura's hand off her arm at the wrist. Then it went wrong, because Shigaraki had 160 years of stolen quirks in him, and he had been saving 4 of them for this exact moment, and because he grabbed the blade, both hands. On the cleaver, decay in the right and something else in the left, something old that All for One had taken out of a man in 1974 whose power was to make a thing stop believing in itself, and the 2 of them went into the steel at the same time. And in that same second, the white thing in Izuku's soul made its last bid for the wheel, because there was blood on his hands, and it was hers, and it came up screaming through him with the mask forming over half his face, and for one terrible instant, there were 2 people trying to hold the same sword. Zangetsu broke, not with a ring, with a sound like a bell being told to stop, a wrongness that everyone in that street felt in their teeth, and 11 inches of it stayed in his hand, and the rest of it came apart in the air into pieces that went to nothing before they landed. The coat went with it. The pressure went out of the street like a room being unplugged. Izuku Midoriya went down on both knees in a decaying road with Momo Yaoyorozu's blood on his hands and half a hilt in his fist and no sword in the world. Shigaraki Tomura stood over him, laughing through a mouth that no longer closed all the way. "There it is," he said. "There it is. Sensei said you'd have something. Sensei said everything has something. Do you want to watch me finish the arm, or do you want to watch me start on her face?" Izuku closed his eyes. Now the story goes down, and this is the deepest it goes. The sideways city was gone. There was water where it had been, all the way to a horizon that was also water, and rain coming from below, and one broken building standing up out of it with two figures on the roof. And they were the same height, and Izuku understood as he came out of the water that they had always been the same height, and he had never once let himself see it. The man in the black cloak had white hair on one side. The white thing had a cloak on one shoulder. They stood together and they spoke together, and it was one voice. "You've been holding two things and calling them a war," they said. "The sword you've had since you were 4 was the shape of that war. It was two of us pretending to be a blade so you'd have something to point. Then give me a real one. You'll have to say the thing you said in the park." The rain came up around them. Not the words a hero says. The words a 4-year-old said with his hands in his mother's stomach. Say it and mean it at 11 kilometers, boy, because that is where she is, and she has about 40 seconds. Izuku Midoriya stood on the roof of the last building in his own soul, with the water rising, and said it the way he said it when he was 4. "I'm not fighting because I want to win. I'm fighting because I have to win." The water went flat, and the two of them put their hands into his chest and took hold of something and pulled it out, and it came out long, longer than the cleaver had ever been, longer than a man, black along the spine and white along the edge, honest at last about the two things that had made it, with a wrapping at the hilt that was cloth and a guard that was nothing at all. "Its name hasn't changed," they said. "You have." At 12:43 in the afternoon, in a decaying street in Jaku, a boy on his knees opened his eyes and put his hand out into empty air and closed it on a hilt. Shigaraki Tomura had time to stop laughing. The first swing did not go at him. It went at the ground. Izuku came off his knees and cut horizontally through the air at hip height, 11 kilometers of it. And the black and white crescent that came off that edge went east through the decay field, and this is the sentence in every after-action report, and 11 physicists have tried to improve on it and failed. It took the decay out of the world. 4 kilometers of powder stopped being powder, not restored. The buildings stayed down. But the spread stopped at a line as straight as a drawn edge, and everything past that line held, and 1,100 civilians in a shelter whose ceiling had begun to whiten felt the whitening stop. Shigaraki looked at it. "What did you?" "Cut it off," Izuku said. "Your quirk was reaching. Now it isn't." Then he went up. The last wave of Nomu came in at 12:51. The deep reserve, 41 of them, the finished ones, the ones Ujiko had been building for 6 years. And they came across the sky over 3 prefectures in a line. Izuku Midoriya put the mask on and raised one hand and gave them the black sun. Acero Oscuras at that altitude does something to a sky that had never been photographed before. It removed the 41, and it removed the cloud layer, and it opened a corridor of clear air 200 kilometers long from Jaku to the Sea of Japan that stayed open for 11 hours and was visible from orbit and got its own name on the weather charts. Jagantamachaya came out of the hillside for the second time at 104. He got 11 steps. Izuku came down on him from 400 meters with the new blade in both hands and cut a creature the size of Acidy Block from the crown of the skull to the base of the spine, and the 2 halves of Gigantomachia went down on either side of a valley and hit the ground 11 seconds apart, and 41 heroes who had been fighting that thing for 9 hours sat down where they stood. Toga came out of an alley at 1:11 wearing Momo Yaoyorozu's face. She had gotten the blood in October in a bunk room in the mountains, and she had been saving it, and she thought it was the cleverest thing anybody had ever done. She came up the street in a red costume with her hands out and said his name in a voice she had practiced. Izuku Midoriya did not slow down. He cut her once in passing without turning his head and kept walking, and that was Himiko Toga, and the story has nothing else to say about her. And at 1:19 in the afternoon, Shigaraki Tamura made the last decision of his life because he had 160 years of experience whispering in his skull, and it told him the truth, which was that he could not win, and that there was one thing left that would hurt. He went for the girl on the ground. Momo Yaoyorozu was 1,100 meters back with a tourniquet on her left arm above the elbow, being worked on by 2 paramedics in the shell of her own vehicle, and she was conscious, and she saw him coming. She got her right hand up and made a shield out of it in 4 seconds, which is the fastest she ever did anything. He came through it. He put his remaining hand flat on the center of her chest, on the plate she had built for herself, and it began to go. And she looked up past him at the sky and had time to say one word into a throat mic that 11 agencies were listening to. Izuku. Here is the part everybody watches through their fingers. He was 400 meters up. He came down. And on the way down, something happened that the entire hero establishment of Japan witnessed on 11 separate camera feeds, and that the commission classified for 4 years, and that leaked anyway, because of course it did. The mask came first, out of the air, over his face, and it kept going. It grew horns that curled forward and then curled again. It plated down his throat and across his chest, and the armor came with it, segmented, bone white, and there was a hole through the center of his sternum that you could see the ruined street through. His hair came down past his shoulder blades in a mane the color of a struck match, and it moved in air that had stopped moving. The blade in his hand was still there, and it had gone the white of the armor, and there was no roar. That is the thing every witness says first. Every single one of them. There was no sound at all. The Ceroscuras had a scream in it. The USJ had a scream in it. This had a silence around it in a radius of about a kilometer, a stillness where the wind had decided against participating, and 41 professional heroes went to their knees in that silence without a single note being played. Vasto Lord came down into the street. Shigaraki Tomura got his hand off her chest and turned around and had 160 years of stolen power available to him and used 11 of them in the next second and a half. None of them reached. The thing in the white mask took his arm off, and then his other arm, and then it took him off the ground by the throat and held him up, and it spoke, and the voice came out layered, 2 voices in one throat, and one of them was a boy's, and the other one had never been human at all. She said my name. Shigaraki's legs kicked. You touched her anyway. And then in front of 11 camera feeds and 400 professional heroes and a live national broadcast that a producer in Shibuya let run because she could not make her hand move to the switch, it opened its jaws between the horns, and the light gathered in front of a mouth should not have had a mouth, and it fired at contact range. There is nothing left of the footage after that except the light. 11 seconds of it. When the frame comes back, there's a trench of fused glass running east out of that street for 400 meters, and it is empty. And the thing in the white mask is standing at the near end of it with its hands still up and closed around a collar that has nothing in it. Tamura Shigaraki did not have a body to bury. The League of Villains ended at 1:19 in the afternoon. And then Vasto Lord turned around and walked toward the girl on the ground, and Japan watched 21 teenagers and 11 paramedics and 4 pro heroes get between the most powerful thing on earth and one wounded 17-year-old and lose. They lost by kneeling. All of them. The pressure took every one of them down on the way past. Kirishima, Ida on his rebuilt legs, Ochako Uraraka with both hands on the ground and her jaw locked, Katsuki Bakugo with his fingers dug into the asphalt and his shoulders shaking with the effort of trying and failing to get his knee under himself. Aizawa had his eyes open and pointed straight at it, and nothing happened at all. And he wrote a line in his notebook 11 days later that he had already written once and underlined it this time. It stood over Momo Yaoyorozu. She was awake. Her left arm was gone below the elbow. She was looking up at a mask with hollow points of light in the sockets, at horns, at a hole in a chest where a boy's ribs should have been, and there was nothing in that face she recognized. And every single person watching that feed understood in the same instant that this was the moment the story either ended or did not. She lifted her right hand. She put it flat against the white plate over its chest on the edge of the hole, and the plate was hot enough to burn her again, and she let it. "Izuku," she said, "we're safe. You did it. You can stop." The layered voice came out of it, and it said the two words the story has been carrying since a pier in Yokohama, and they arrived in an inhuman register with 100 people kneeling in the road. And this is the most frightening sentence anybody in that country heard that year, and also the only one that mattered. "You're safe now." Then the mask cracked from the left eye socket to the jaw. It came apart in fragments, and the fragments went to ash before they landed, and the armor went, and the mane fell short, and the hole in his chest closed as if it had never been given permission in the first place. And Izuku Midoriya, 16 years old, sat down in the road next to her and got his hand under her head before it touched the ground. "Your arm," he said. "I've got another one." Her eyes were streaming. "Come here. Come here." He put his forehead against hers, and 41 professional heroes looked somewhere else, and that is the second of their 3 scenes, and it lasted 11 seconds, and it is the most private thing that ever happened in front of a national audience. The Paranormal Liberation War was declared over at 2:11 p.m. 41 heroes were dead. 1,900 civilians were dead, most of them in Fukuoka, and every one of those deaths was in the 11 minutes before he got there, which is a thing he has never once said out loud and has thought about every day since. Shigaraki was gone. Jigen Tamakiya was gone. Dabi was gone. Toga was gone. Ujiko was in a cell with 11 cameras on him. 130 Nomu had been erased in volume, and the corridor in the clouds over the Sea of Japan was still open, and 11 governments were on the phone at the same time. At 2:40 p.m., in front of the wreckage of a shelter, a thing that had been alive for 160 years finished the last of what it needed to do inside a body that had stopped existing and moved. He did not need Shigaraki. He had never needed Shigaraki. That had always been a plan for a world in which nothing walked around with a black and white sword in it. And that world had ended in October. All for One had spent 4 months in a boy's skull, with 411 quirks, and a regeneration he had stolen from a woman in Kobe in 1961. And he built himself a new body out of the pieces of the old one and 11 others. And at 2:40 in the afternoon, he stood up on top of the tallest ruin in Jaku, with a face made of scars and no mouth to speak with. And every camera in 3 prefectures found him at once, and he spoke into every phone and every television and every radio in Japan at the same time, because one of the 411 does that. "This country was mine before any of you were born," he said. "I loaned it out. I am recalling it." Then he ripped a mountain out of the ground and threw it at a shelter with 1,100 people in it. The fight that followed lasted 41 minutes, and it is the reason there is a new geological survey of eastern Japan. Izuku Midoriya caught the mountain. He caught 400 million tons of hillside, 11 meters above a shelter roof, with both hands and a lattice of blue running from his knuckles to his jaw, and he turned it and put it down in a valley to the east, and the impact registered on instruments in Vladivostok. And that was the shape of the first movement. And the first movement went to All for One. And the story is going to be honest about that too, because the old man had learned. He had spent 4 months watching. He knew exactly what the boy was, and he knew precisely one weakness in him, which was that Izuku Midoriya would always, without a single exception in 11 years, go to the thing that was screaming. So he made everything scream. He put a hand into the ground and dropped a fault line under a residential district, and Izuku had to hold a street together with a swing while 40 families came out of it. He took a quirk out of a captured Nomu and made the air in a hospital toxic. And Izuku had to go up and cut the top off the atmosphere over it to vent it. He picked up 11 pro heroes and threw them into the sky in 4 directions at once, and Izuku caught 9 of them, and the other 2 are on a wall in Chiyoda now with their names in brass, and that is the price of the 2 he could not reach. For 19 minutes, Izuku Midoriya was not fighting a man. He was doing triage at 400 kilometers an hour while something laughed at him from a rooftop, and he took 11 hits he could have avoided, and each one landed because he had somebody in his arms at the time. At minute 19, All for One threw the last thing he had, which was a location. The girl with one arm, he said, into every radio in Japan, is in a medical vehicle at grid 411, and I have already sent something, and you cannot be in two places. Izuku was in one place, and it was the right one, and there was nothing at grid 411 because Momo Yaoyorozu had moved her own vehicle 11 minutes earlier on her own initiative with one arm and a broken sternum, and had radioed him the new position on a channel that worked inside his field and that nobody else on Earth could hear. That is the third scene, and it happened over a radio in the middle of a catastrophe, and it consisted of 9 words. I moved. Grid 9-2. Finish it and come back. Coming back. Then Izuku Midoriya turned around and went at him, and the second movement began. And the second movement is the part they show in schools. He took him through a mountain, both of them at speed, through 1,100 meters of granite and out the far side, and the mountain came down behind them. He went to Bankai and put a black crescent through All for One's chest that would have ended anything else on the planet, and the old man grew it back in 11 seconds out of a stolen regeneration and shot him out of the sky with a stolen cannon. He put on the mask and gave him a Sero at 4 meters. And All for One absorbed 60% of it into a quirk designed for exactly that and let the other 40% take his own left side off and grew that back too. He gave him the wings. He hung over a ruined prefecture with a cross of light 4 stories tall behind him and put 11,000 arrows into one man, and All for One stood in the middle of it and used a quirk he had taken from a boy in Nagoya in 1988 that made objects belong to him, and 4,000 of those arrows turned around in the air. Izuku ate them. Blut Veni held. He came down out of the sky with 100 wounds and hit him with a fist that put a hole through a hillside behind him. He gave him the Gran Rey Sero, blood on the edge, air bending, and All for One held out both hands and took it, actually took it, and screamed while he did it, and stole enough of the shape of it that his own arms came off again for the second time in a year. He gave him the Black Sun. Sero Oscuras at ground level, and it removed 11 kilometers of ruined city and the horizon behind it and left a trench you can see from an airplane on the Tokyo Sapporo route, and the ocean came into the eastern end of it and is there now, and it is on maps. All for One walked out of the trench with one arm and half a face and 411 quirks and the ability to regrow all of it, and he was laughing without a mouth. And he said the thing that he had been building toward the whole time. You cannot kill me. Nothing can kill me. I have been 31 bodies. If you take this one apart, I will be in another one before it hits the ground, and I have all the time there has ever been, and you have a mother in Musutafu who is 51 years old. Izuku Midoriya stood in a trench with the sea coming in behind him and blood running out of both ears. 160 years, he said, and you still never learned to be worth them. And then he did the thing. The story is going to slow all the way down now because this is the last of it. And because there are 11 million words on the internet about the next 9 seconds, and every one of them is somebody trying to explain a colorless sky, Izuku Midoriya put the blade in the ground and stopped holding himself together. The pressure that came off him was the whole of it, all 11 years, unsuppressed and unfolded, and the sea went back from the trench mouth in a wall, and the cloud deck over Japan turned in a spiral 1,100 kilometers wide that showed up on satellite images that are still on the front of every atmospheric textbook printed since. Every soul in that country felt it. That is documented. 11 million people in Tokyo reported the same sensation at the same moment, which is best described as being looked at. You want to know what I've got left, he said. I'll tell you, because you've earned an honest answer out of somebody at least once. He put both hands on the hilt. The difference in our power is like heaven and earth. All for One, who had felt fear one time in 160 years in a street in Camino, felt it a second time and understood that there would not be a third. He ran. 31 bodies worth of instinct, 411 quirks, and every single one of them pointed at the horizon. This is the last thing I have, Izuku said. It's enough for you. Then he raised the sword, and the black came up out of the ground instead of down out of the sky, and it took the color out of the world. Mugetsu. Here is what happened over Japan for 9 seconds, and the story will keep it as plain as it can, because plain is the only way it survives being told. The sky went black from Kyushu to Hokkaido. Not overcast, black in the middle of the afternoon, with the sun still up there somewhere behind whatever had been put in front of it. Streetlights came on across 4 prefectures because their sensors said night. 11 million people looked up at the same time and could not find anything to look at. Sound stopped. That is the part nobody has explained. For 9 seconds, across an area of about 400,000 square kilometers, sound did not travel correctly. Church bells swung without ringing. A train came into Ueno Station with a full brake application and made no noise at all. A woman in Sendai screamed and heard nothing, and her son heard nothing, and the two of them held each other in a silent kitchen, and every single soul in that radius felt the world lose a color. There is no better way to put it, and 11,000 people have tried. Something that had always been there was subtracted for 9 seconds, and when it came back, everybody knew exactly what had been missing, and none of them could say the name of it. In the middle of it, in a trench by the sea, one figure raised one blade and brought it down through the back of a running man. The final Getsuga Tenshō does not cut a body. It cuts the thing behind a body. It went through all for one at the level where a soul is kept, and it took the 411 quirks, and the 31 bodies worth of memory, and the 160 years, and the plan, and the voice that had been in a boy's skull, and the part of him that could have jumped into a waiting host, and it took all of it out of every register in the world at once. There was no body. There was no ash. There was nothing at any level, anywhere. The men who went looking for things found a trench with seawater in it, and a suit button. All for one had a name once. Nobody has ever found it, and nobody ever will now, because that got taken too. The light came back at 3:21 p.m., and Izuku Midoriya fell out of the sky. He came down from 1,100 meters with nothing left in him at all. No pressure, no lines, no sword, no coat, no mask. The whole thing spent down to the walls. An ordinary 16-year-old boy with 4 broken ribs and a hole in his shoulder and both ears bleeding, tumbling, unconscious, over a ruined prefecture at terminal velocity. Ochako Uraraka had been on her feet for 11 hours. She had floated 400 people out of a decaying shelter and 11 bodies out of a road and had used her quirk past the point where it makes you sick and out the other side into the place where it makes you cold. And she was sitting on a chunk of concrete with her head between her knees when the sky came back on and somebody screamed and pointed. She got up. She could not fly. She has never been able to fly. What she could do was run 1,100 meters in 90 seconds on a broken city and put her fingertips together and reach up and touch him at 40 meters with the very last of a quirk she should not have had access to at all. He stopped falling and started drifting. She brought him down onto a road with both hands out and her nose bleeding and her legs shaking, and he settled into the dust like something being put back on a shelf. And then she went down beside him and threw up on her own boots. And then she put 2 fingers under his jaw and found a pulse and started laughing in a way that frightened everyone around her. That is the photograph they used on the cover of the report. A girl on her knees in a wrecked road with her hand on a boy's chest and 11 people running toward her from 4 directions. Ochako Uraraka never talked about it much. She was asked on a talk show 3 years later what she had thought about while she was running, and she said, without any preparation at all, that somebody had to be underneath him for once. And here's the one clean beat this story owes her, and then it will move on the way she did. 11 days after the war, on the roof of a hospital in Musutafu at 2 a.m, Ochako Uraraka sat down next to Momo Yaoyorozu, who had one arm and a prosthetic socket she had designed herself while on morphine, and both of them looked at the door to the stairwell, behind which a boy was asleep in a chair beside a bed for the 4th night in a row because a 6-year-old had asked him to stay. You ran into it at the USJ, Ochako said. The pressure. Your nose was bleeding and you ran into it. You'd have done it. I don't think I would have. Ochako Uraraka pulled her knees up. I've thought about it a lot, actually. I was on those stairs, too. I couldn't stand up and you could. And I've decided that's not a thing about our legs. She wiped her face with the back of her wrist once and got it over with. I love him. I've loved him since a lamppost in a fake city. And I caught him out of the sky 11 days ago, and I'd do it every day for the rest of my life, and it still wouldn't be the same thing as what you did. And Momo did not insult her by saying anything comforting. He's going to need people who catch him, she said. Yeah. Ochako put her head on Momo's shoulder, the right one, the side with the arm. So don't get any ideas about doing it alone, rich girl. I wouldn't dream of it. They sat up there until 4 a.m, and they were friends for the rest of their lives, and it was never once complicated again. The 11 months after that are the part of the legend nobody puts in the video, and they are the part this story likes best. Izuku Midoriya woke up on the 4th day with nothing in him. That is the honest medical summary, and it is also the whole emotional weight of the year. He could not feel souls. He walked into a hospital corridor full of the dying and felt exactly what any other visitor feels, which is a corridor. He closed his eyes and reached for a sideways city and found the inside of his own eyelids. He put his hand out into the air and got air. And the sword, the real one, the black and white one, which had come out of the sky with him and landed in a road and stayed, was, from that day, a very heavy piece of steel, and it leaned in the corner of his bedroom in a 2-bedroom apartment in Musutafu, and he could not lift it. He tried on the second morning home when he thought nobody was looking. He got both hands on it and put his back into it and moved it about 11 centimeters, and then sat down on the floor. His mother cried, and she cried about the wrong thing. And that is the detail that undoes people. She did not cry about the arm he could not lift, or the hearing in his left ear that took 4 months to come back, or the fact that her son had gone from being the most powerful thing on earth to a very large teenager with a limp. She cried because on the 11th night he slept until morning. She came in at 6 to check on him the way she had come in at 6 every night for 11 years, and he was on his back with one arm over his face and his mouth open. And there was nothing in the room, nothing standing in the corner, nothing pressing on the windows, no hum in the glass, nothing following him home. Inko Midoriya sat down on the floor of the hallway outside her son's bedroom and put both hands over her mouth and cried until the sun came up. Because her boy had finally, at 16, gotten one full night. He was terrible at being ordinary, and everybody found it hilarious. He could not open jars. He complained about stairs. He tried to jog and made it 4 kilometers and then sat on a bench in a park for 20 minutes. And a woman with a dog recognized him and asked if he was all right, and he said, "I'm resting," in a voice of profound personal offense, and it made the news. Eri taught him her card again because the rules had changed because she had invented 11 new ones. He lost 31 consecutive hands in April and accused a 7-year-old of cheating out loud in front of witnesses. And she looked him in the eye and said, "You're bad at it." And Izuku Midoriya had no reply available to him for the first time since a hearing on the 14th floor of a building in Chiyoda. Momo came 4 times a week with her left arm in an aluminum sleeve. She was still improving. And she made him do the physiotherapy, and he hated her for it, in a way that fooled precisely nobody in that apartment. And Katsuki Bakugo came in June, once, and stood in the doorway of a bedroom with his hands in his pockets and looked at a very heavy sword leaning in a corner. "You've got a lot of get well cards," he said. 2,000. "That's stupid." "Yeah." Bakugo looked at the wall for 11 seconds. "I trained 3 extra hours a day for 2 years because of a crack in a wall," he said, "every night. Since the corridor, everybody thinks it was about beating you, and it wasn't. It was about being close enough to you that when it happened, I'd be standing next to it instead of on the floor watching." His jaw worked. "In Jaku, I was on the floor watching. What, both times? I couldn't get my knee under me. I want you to know I'm going to fix that, and I want you to know that it's good that you're here. That's it. That's the whole thing." And then he left at speed before anybody could respond to it, and slammed the door of an apartment belonging to a woman he had known since he was 4, and Izuku Midoriya called after him that he should take some oranges. And he took the oranges. The commission never did work out what to call him. They tried. There is a file. There's an entire directorate now, established by legislation in the spring, with a mandate covering non-quirk metaphysical incursion. And it has 400 employees and a training program that Izuku Midoriya wrote 11 pages of by hand and refused to be paid for. There are detection stations on 11 coastlines. There is a class at UA called Soul Threat Response that Aizawa teaches with a straight face and a syllabus that is mostly the phrase run away and radio it in. But the man himself broke every category the world had. And in the end, an internal memo from the Hero Public Safety Commission, dated the following January and leaked within a week, as everything about him always was, put it in the only honest way anyone ever managed. There is no existing designation for the subject. Recommend the creation of a designation of 1. His hero license to this day says emitter type, soul resonance. He never once asked them to change it. It came back on a Thursday in September, and there was rain. He was on the balcony of a 2-bedroom apartment in Mustafu at 9 in the evening with his elbows on the rail, and Momo Yaoyorozu was inside at the kitchen table with a soldering iron and a stack of prosthetic wrist components, and Inko's tea going cold beside her. And Eri was asleep on the sofa with the cards still fanned out on her stomach because she had won again. And the rain stopped falling on him. Not everywhere. In a circle maybe 3 meters across, over one balcony in a residential block, so that the drops came down to a certain height and then went sideways, and the little pool by the drain went still. Izuku Midoriya looked at his hand. There was a blue line under the skin of his wrist, one, thin as a thread, and it came up and went down again, like something turning over in its sleep. Behind him, in the bedroom, the sword hummed. He heard it through the wall. That low ringing note, the church bell sound from a path in Tatsumi Park 11 years and 11 lifetimes ago, and the hair went up on his arms and something in his chest that had been sitting in an empty room for 11 months stood up and put its coat on. Momo. She was already in the doorway. She had heard it too, because she has always heard it, because she built the only equipment in Japan that works inside his field, and she had learned the sound of it before anybody else on Earth. The soldering iron was still in her right hand. The aluminum sleeve caught the light on her left. Her sleeves were pushed up and the burns were there, wrist to elbow, in the shape of hands holding on, and she has still never once explained them to anybody. And by then, nobody in that country needed her to. She looked at the rain hanging in the air and at the boy standing under a hole in the weather, and she did the arithmetic of the rest of both their lives in about a second and a half, which is exactly as long as it took a monster in Camino Ward. "How much of it?" she said. "All of it." He turned around, and there was that thing at the corner of his mouth, the one the animators used 11,000 times. "It's coming back. I can feel the whole city again. There's a woman on the 4th floor who's going to have a baby tonight, and there's something moving in the water off the pier, and the sword's awake and my ears hurt." He rolled his shoulder, the way he has rolled it since he was 14. "I've got about 19 hours before somebody official finds out and puts me in a room. Then we should get you a coat." "Momo." She stopped in the doorway. He had spent 11 years being unable to say anything to anybody, sure, and it had cost him almost nothing at any point, because there had always been a sword to say it with. Standing on a balcony in the rain with a blue line under his wrist and a hum coming through the wall, he found that the sword was going to be busy, and that he was going to have to do this part himself. "All of it was ever for one thing," he said. "The park, the hearing, the pier, the tunnels, the black sky, all of it. It was never about being the strongest. It was about there being somewhere for people to stand." He looked at her arm and then at her face and did not look away from it, which for him was the entire declaration. "Wherever I'm standing is yours. That's it. That's the whole trick." Momo Yaoyorozu set the soldering iron down on the rail in the rain where it would be ruined and did not care. "Then move over," she said. "I'm not standing behind you anymore."
The Hero Roster. A massive salute to the legends backing this journey. Your support is what keeps the momentum at an all-time high and the dream moving forward. You guys are the absolute best. Pro heroes, the elite front line, stepping up and setting the pace for the whole community. DA, Fire 05. Symbol of peace. The pillars of the community. The titans who keep our foundations solid and the hype at an all-time high. Alexander Igarza. That guy Miso. Deck. Lydell Scott Jr. James Martin. Victor Larux. Rune Brokstad. Ariuse Bryant. Jonah Wheeler. T-Mac. XXHJRX3A7XX. Hyperbeams. Michael Murphy. Grand Region Kell. Sin Hunter. Logan Bland. Alexander Johannes. Alex Morgan. Ray Various. That other guy too. Chad Reynolds. T. Mackie 68 Rimuru. A. Zetros. Dweller of the deepest depths. Lone Wolf. Jacob Ropes. Bully Maguire Shadow. Rathakit Thitiratnan Thakul. Neostar Productions. Asael Cardenas. Shaquan Simmons. Thunder. Sunawin 631. Elijah Saunders. Peter Hamilton. Freddie Rose. Omega. Akuma Noakami. Remorsefuls. Black Vein. Joshua Hedrington. Aaron Abercrombie. Drift SK8ER. Corey Tokars. Jan. Devin Black. Crow. Joe Bros. Ray Von Crimson River. Dante Alastor. Adam Yonkers. Blood Saints. Donna Cafe. Zeph. KC. Howie 60. Ignacio. Hope of the universe. The ultimate guardians. Celestial tier supporters whose impact literally shines across the galaxy. Void Rot. Chaos Umbre. Noroi Uzumaki Uchiha. Tyshawn Palmer. Coldbane 4. The Maniac 563. Debs. LS Morningstar. Marl. Spintown. I Shoot X50. Greg Green. James. Q Honyen Thompson. Juan. And Zeno KJ. You made it to the end. Thank you. If the story gripped you, please like and subscribe. Tell me in the comments which part hit hardest. Your feedback shapes what comes next. Fresh videos drop regularly, so stick around. Appreciate every one of you. Until the next adventure.